This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Senate Chamber. Programme sound.
Any other devices which may make a noise. Your tablet, as you're aware, the quickest way to switch this off is function and F8. Also remind members to declare any interest, financial or otherwise, as we move through today's business. We have no apologies. I'm not sure if other members have apologies on behalf of colleagues. No? Okay, just the only item of chairperson's business is in relation to the SEND bill, and just want to remind everyone that the second stage of the Special Educational Needs and Disability Bill will be considered on Tuesday the 10th of March, so ensure that that's in your diary, and obviously any remarks that you wish to make can be made at that stage for second stage before we move into our committee stage. Draft minutes of the meetings of the 18th and 25th of February are at page 6 and 14. Are members content that they are an accurate reflection of those proceedings? Those who are in attendance? Just agree? We agreed?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. There are no matters arising at this stage. We'll move then into our first briefing, which is the ministerial briefing on 2015-16 DE final budget. Just refer you to the clerk's cover note at page 19, and also to table papers. There's correspondence from DE, YouthNet and Young Farmers. We welcome to the meeting. We have Minister for Education John O'Dowd, Fiona Hepper, Deputy Secretary, Department of Education, Trevor Connolly, Director of Finance, Department of Education, and Philip Irwin, Director of Investment and Infrastructure, again from the Department of Education. You're all very welcome, and thank you for attending with us today. Unfortunately, I do have to leave, as you're aware. My colleague Jim Shannon's father sadly passed away, and his funeral was this morning. Can I invite you to make an opening statement?
Yes.
And members will then follow up with some questions.
Chair, thank you for inviting me here today. Can I also pass on my sympathies to Jim Shannon on the passing of his father as well? Chair, I'm here today to discuss the final outworkings of the Department of Education's budget. And I'm sure the committee will appreciate that after 5 years of year-on-year cuts to the block grant, which now stands somewhere in the region of £1 billion less spending power for the executive, the Department of Education, like other departments, has faced difficult choices down through those years. However, as each year passes and you reduce your budget year on year, the choice the year after, or the decisions you have to make then, become more and more difficult. And I have to say, in terms of preparing this budget, it has been the most difficult budget I've had to prepare in my tenure as Education Minister. And I suspect that many people around the table would not, or would share with me that they would not want to make the choices that have been made here today. However, we are in a financial position, in my opinion, created by others. We are in an economy which is largely driven, or our economic strategy is largely driven by others. And I do believe that the executive continues to manage to mitigate against some of the worst aspects of austerity measures which are decided elsewhere. And the executive, through the Stormont House Agreement, and indeed through the preparation of what has been a difficult budget for all departments, has done everything in its power to mitigate against the worst excesses. But however, individual ministers have to make decisions, and then those decisions have ramifications for its organisations under its control. In my case, over 1,100 schools, the Education Authority and other arm's-length bodies. I forwarded yesterday to the committee a detailed paper on my final decisions around the budget, and I apologise for the late delay in providing the committee with that paper. However, I would emphasise that up until the evening before decisions were being made, we were examining every line of the budget to see how we could further mitigate against the worst excesses of a reduced budget. And when the final decision was made, there was no delay in forwarding the paper on to the Education Committee for scrutiny, and indeed in preparation for today's meeting. You will note that despite the very welcome additional £64 million being provided to my department as a result of the Executive's final budget, we still face significant pressures within the Department of Education around a 5% funding gap remains, which equates to around £97 million. In terms of capital, and our capital budget is significantly impacted, almost 20% reduction, which results in £36.1 million. And while much focus has been on our resource budget and the impact of that on frontline services, a reduction of 20% of our capital budget will have a significant impact on the delivery of minor works. It will have a significant impact on the SEP programme, the School Enhancement Programme, moving forward as well throughout this year. I have outlined each area of where I'm proposing or where I will be reducing my budget to colleagues in the document I have prepared. I in no way suggest that any of the services of which I am reducing are not important, that they are not doing good work, and that they are not making a positive impact on individuals and community lives. However, some simply don't add up, and I have to provide stability to the education budget and to the education service moving forward. The £97 million in which I'm proposing, or which we are short in terms of savings, is also then balanced against the fact that a significant amount of those savings relate to staff costs. And I have done everything within my power to protect jobs, both in terms of school teachers, non-teachers and support staff throughout the boards. However, how schools manage their budgets is delegated to schools. So we're dealing with 1,137 different budget lines who will make decisions around staff costs. The Education Authority will have to make decisions around staff costs as well. So a lot of that is out of my control, and I will have to wait until late April, May time, perhaps June, before I have a full understanding of exactly what savings have been made by those bodies in terms of staff costs. So I am setting aside an additional £18 million of savings to use at a later stage in the financial year, either to mitigate against savings not being achieved by those bodies, or, and this, there's only a slight chance of this, that I may be able to inject that into frontline services, into education moving forward. Over this period of time, from the final budget was announced by the Executive until I presented the paper to the Executive or to the Committee, I have also been doing a revision of my own budget. I have been looking at areas where we can save costs without a reduction in staff. I have accumulated quite a significant amount of money in that regard, around £28.7 million. I'm immediately reinvesting £10 million of that into the Education Authority, as you will note in the document I presented to you. I have carried out that action for a number of reasons. We know there are significant pressures in the Education Authority in terms of special educational needs. That is rising year on year. They also face pressures in relation to pay and inflationary costs and price costs. And the Education Authority, even with that £10 million injection, faces a pressure of around £9.7 million. And as I've said, the £18 million that will be left from that saving pot will be used to balance the budget or invest in frontline services moving forward. So, Chair, each year I've presented the budget to the Committee. Has been in difficult circumstances, but this is the most difficult one yet. I believe that we have carried out a thorough investigation of my budget. There has been a significant consultation, over 23,000 responses to the consultation. There was an assembly debate where members of the Committee and others expressed their views around the direction of travel of education spending. There has been much public debate about the matter. The trade unions organised public events across the north, which were well attended, and there was vibrant, healthy debate at those as well. And I have attempted to protect frontline services as much as I possibly can. And there's a number of unknown factors as we move forward, and I can conclude on this. As I say, we won't know the exact savings achieved by the boards of the schools until May, June time. There's an election, general election in May, and without wishing to interfere in the direction of travel of Westminster, I sincerely hope the Conservatives are not returned, because I believe their economic policies are crippling this society. Whoever is returned to government needs to realise that their austerity policies are not working, and that the continuing cuts to our block grants are having a detrimental impact on the services we provide to our society.
Thank you, and acknowledge that this is a challenge. This has been a challenging budget period, but also recognise that it's been incredibly difficult for schools over a protracted period of time, particularly in the run-up to the Christmas period and beyond. Glad to see that at least that we have brought this to some sort of conclusion, so that schools then can start to make some quite difficult decisions. And although obviously there has been additional money has been put into the aggregated schools budget, which is obviously very welcome, there are still savings which need to be made, particularly in relation to staff costs and increased overhead costs as well. Board of Governors will have to make some challenging decisions, and perhaps have to look towards redundancies in order to live within their budgets. Can we have a commitment from the Department and yourself, Minister, that any associated costs with regards to redundancies will be met, and that we won't run into the fiasco that we had last year?
Well, in terms of how redundancies will be paid for, that will come out of the central fund held by the Executive. We are in detailed discussions with the Department of Finance and Personnel, and there has been a programme set out as to how various departments will access funding to pay for redundancies. Now, all departments are feeding into the one pot. Our preparations are well advanced. My colleagues from the department are in detailed discussions with DFP officials, and we will prepare the paperwork and the business cases in time for DFP approval. And of course, DFP will have to follow their own procedures and engage with my department around those matters, and if they have any questions around those. So I believe that we will have the processes and procedures in place well in time. The amount of money available, I'm not overly concerned that there won't be enough money available to deal with the redundancies in education, but I cannot confirm that until all departments have bid and DFP have made their announcements around those matters. But in relation to the pressures on schools' budgets, there is a pressure of approximately £28 million in relation to staff pay in connection with schools. Schools will make individual decisions as to how they deal with those pressures. But I would also say that there is a £41 million surplus fund sitting at the centre. Now, I don't expect nor would I encourage schools to draw down that entire fund, but I think it would be a reasonable assumption to suggest that perhaps around £10 million of that fund would be drawn down this year, which would assist schools in dealing with the financial pressures they have. But each school will be different. Some schools will have surpluses, some schools will have deficits, and they will have to make those decisions to live within budgets. But in terms, there will be a central fund for redundancies. We are well prepared in terms of bidding for that, but DFP will have to make the decisions as to how much funds can be allocated to each department moving forward. And I'm reasonably confident that we'll be able to cover all redundancies.
Just in relation to, in real terms, the impact of reductions within the detail of this budget, how do you anticipate that will work itself out within the school estate?
In terms of staffing, or in
terms of services?
It's going to have a detrimental impact on the delivery of services across the estate, because there's no one sitting around the executive table claiming that our budget is sufficient or the direction of travel is correct. And whether you be the DFP minister or the education minister or any other minister sitting around the table, we all have to deal with a restricted budget being given to us by the Westminster government. So I'm certainly not sitting here today saying the education budget is sufficient, or that people should be able to deliver the same services on the 1st of April as they were on the 30th of March, because the budgets are significantly different. However, there is a number of factors which need to come into play. I mentioned the surplus. Schools will have to start looking at that surplus and the drawdown on that surplus. I will have to make assessments in around May, June time, when I know exactly how much savings are going to be made through staff redundancies. And if schools and boards are meeting those targets, then I may be able to inject some more money into the system at that stage, which will alleviate some of the pressures. But when I look across, I have pressures in a number of areas. For instance, school maintenance. School maintenance is proposed to spend around £15 million, £14 million this year. We spent £22 million in school maintenance last year, and quite a significant amount of more than that in the year before, so there's a pressure there. There is a resource pressure in terms of materials and furniture for new schools, significant pressure there. There are pressures in terms of the Education Authority. The Education Authority is facing increasing costs in and around special educational needs. So all those pressures remain. How I will be able to assist those various bodies moving forward depends on a number of events, particularly in terms of what savings are made through staff redundancies moving forward.
Okay, thank you very much, and apologies, I have to go.
Understandable.
Mr. Craig.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, listening with interest there, because obviously I have been one of those people sitting doing those financial numbers for you. What is yourself, the department, or the new authority, as it will in practice be whenever the budget really kicks in, what actions are they going to take against schools who have, up until this point, completely ignored what I would call good financial practice, and they've just continued to go into a deeper and deeper deficit, and nothing but nothing seems to happen to them?
Well, my department engages on a weekly basis with the boards in relation to school finances, but in a more structured way, we would do quarterly governance meetings with each of the managing authorities, whether it be the boards or CCMS or whomever it may be, and we go through areas where we have concerns about budget lines. Managing authorities have a duty to ensure that schools are living within their budgets, or ensure that they have a plan which is in place which will bring them into living within their budgets. And there has been actions taken against various schools down through that period. And schools who are in significant deficit also do not or should not be allowed to avail of other outside funding in terms of other resources the board may have to assist them. So it's in the interest of the schools to do that, but up to and including closure. Because if a school is not financially viable moving forward, then it places a significant strain on the entire school's estate and is an unfair burden on schools around it which are living within their budget. So up to and including closure can be a measure taken against such a school.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, Chair, and I'm glad to hear that the department will actually effectively tackle that issue, because it's been a long-running sore for those schools who have tried to be financially astute and keep within their budget. The other issue I noted there, the board seem to have lost their contingency funding. Now, I don't know whether that's planned or it's just something that's a constraint of the budget here. Is the new authority, or is there going to be any sort of contingency funding? Because a lot of, especially special needs schools, rely heavily on that type of funding.
It actually, the common funding scheme requires each funding authority to have a contingency fund. It's the decision of each individual board, the amount that they are able to set aside. And from our perspective, we're not in any way, saying that you should not have a contingency fund. I think you're quite right, John. It's the constraint in terms of the budget, and that's obviously a financial decision that each board individually has to take.
And the new authority, yeah.
And the new authority, obviously, from the 1st of April, will have to do that.
Yeah. So it's a conversation maybe the department needs to have with the new authority, because it will have a disproportionate impact, especially on special educational needs, which is a worrying impact. The other, and my last question really, is around, there's quite a lot of voluntary organisations are now funded under education. I'm looking at the likes of Sure Start, the Prince's Trust, Northern Ireland. What is the actual budgetary impact that the likes of those two organisations, this budget is going to have on them?
Sure Start has a distinct budget line, and under the draft budget we propose taking £2 million out of Sure Start. Under the final budget we are going to take £1 million out of Sure Start, and that's a result of consultation responses and also an acknowledgement of the significant positive impact Sure Start has in our society, particularly areas of social deprivation. So the final budget for Sure Start for 15-16 will be £22.8 million, which is still quite a significant investment in that field. In relation to the other bodies, I will forward the department, and in terms of your spreadsheets which have been provided, the detail of third-party organisations should be contained within that. But if there's any areas of questions or concerns which we're not able to supply the information directly with now, we will forward to the committee in due course.
Yeah. Well, Minister, obviously Sure Start has had a major impact on the underachievement issue that we've seen in Lagan Valley. When you say 1 million's been taken out of their budget, have we any idea what percentage cut in their overall budget that is?
I'll tell you the exact percentage cut now. I'm not suggesting that £1 million is not a significant amount of money. It's 4.2%. It's not a significant amount of money. It is a significant amount of money, but when you're going through a budget trying to achieve over £97 million of savings, you can't go past a budget line of 24 odd million. You simply can't do it.
No.
And that's the unfortunate thing. Now, my officials will be engaging with the various bodies, and we'll endeavour to save as much of these savings from administration rather than frontline services. So that's a discussion and a conversation that has yet to take place with these bodies.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. If I can come in on the back of that, you had a target of on Sure Start of 25%. Are you still going to keep the targets of the rollout at Sure Start was 20% for the most deprived wards, was going to move to 25%? You're still going to try and stick to that?
Well, we will attempt to stick to that target. I don't wish to cover 25% of wards with a service which is not achieving the targets of Sure Start. There has also been a significant review of Sure Start carried out, and that report has only within this last number of days arrived on my desk, and I wish to have time to study that report in detail to ensure that the targets and objectives of Sure Start are being met, or is there another way in which we can achieve those targets through the delivery mechanism of Sure Start. So decisions to be made in the year ahead in relation to how Sure Start services are delivered on the ground.
Thank you. My concern throughout all the budgeting is we still seem to be trying to do everything the way we did it before. All we've done is we're cutting off percentages in every single service that we offer. Are you going to look at reviewing the sacred cows, all the things that are there, and then seeing if we do things differently? Because it just seems extraordinary. Everyone's going to be losing jobs here and there. Are there better ways of doing things? Are you doing a total review?
Vice Chair, I can assure you that we're now well into the sacred cows. Over this last 5 years, the education budget has reduced year on year, and at the start of that process, you could avoid areas where you felt were so important that they couldn't be touched. After 5 years of reductions in budgets, and including a reduction in the block grant, we're now in among the sacred cows. There are services coming to an end. For instance, the £2 million, which I started 2 years ago in relation to the community engagement, which I think is a very good project, and I've often said that we have very, very good teachers, but they won't be able to do this on their own, and we need the involvement of the community. That has now come to an end. The £2 million budget is gone. It's not to be returned. I think in terms of, not only in terms of education, but I think in terms of our society, there's going to have to be a debate and a discussion about what our priorities are and where we as a society want to see investment moving forward. And quite rightly, every minister is on the airwaves and in the newspapers discussing the impact upon their budgets and what impacts they will have. And many of them are negative. But we as a society are going to have to decide what services across the executive we're going to do without to invest in others. And I believe that education and health are on the top of that list.
Which I think we'd agree to. You mentioned when you were speaking at the beginning of the consultation, you had some 20,000 responses and replies. Did you get a whole mass of ideas from different people? For example, when I was talking to schools, the extended school project was something that many thought could be cut. Did you get a lot of ideas from the outside, from teachers, from schools?
Yes, and we'll prepare a report on the consultation responses for the committee. There's a variety of views out there in terms of how we deal with our budget, and sometimes it's based on what area of education the individual or the group is concentrated in, where they believe that their area is the most important. I still think, in terms of our education system, that, I'll repeat it, schools can't do this on their own. There has to be extended schools, there has to be community involvement, we have to bring parents in, we have to reach out beyond the school gates, and that will take some money to do that. It's becoming more and more difficult to do that in any meaningful way. So yes, there's many ideas as what we should do with the education budget. Some of them I would suggest are not strategic in their thinking. There is quite a significant report from the stakeholder group in terms of the trade unions and management side with me at the moment, and it's quite a significant review of budgetary processes, etc., which deserves further study and further comment moving forward. But it depends what side of the fence you're on, Chair, in terms of education. You know.
Okay, thank you. If I could take you back for my last question before I move on to the redundancies. Are we still looking at 1,000 or is it down to 300? You know, have you any feeling of the numbers?
Well, approximate number of redundancies would be around 500 teachers and 1,000 support staff. And that is approximate because it's difficult to estimate because of, as I said to the Chair, we have 1,137 schools which will make their individual decisions, and the Education Authority will also have to make decisions in regards to its funding lines as well. So when all that information comes in, and some of it May, June time would probably, and around with more definitive, that's when we'll know the definitive figures going.
And do you have a time scale for how those redundancies then would work out through the system?
Well, it's estimated that the most of them will leave in September because teachers require 4 months notice. And we're working, as I said earlier, with the DFE department in terms of formalising that exit scheme. Once it's in place, we have already informed schools of the need to make redundancies. They should be putting those measures in place now. But most, if not all, the staff will now leave in around September, which means you have a half-year saving.
Very good. I mean, I met with a whole group of principals last week, and the first measure they said to me was morale. Morale is so appalling, and we need to find some way of raising the morale. And yet we have a fantastic resource in our teachers and everything else. Somehow we've got to find a way of lifting that. Trevor.
Oh, thanks, Chair. There's things forgive me if they're already in the paper, Minister, but there's things I can't just put my eye on at the moment. One of them, there's a target to expand the service at Middletown, for instance. Where does that stand in the arrangements?
I believe that the services at Middletown will still be able to expand. There's approximately 100,000 reduction to the Middletown budget. Again, I would like to see that coming from administration costs rather than frontline services, but I believe that we're still on target to expand those services.
All right. Things like the Book Trust and Sentinels.
The Book Trust budget has been ended. And that, again, a difficult decision. However, it was approximately a budget of around £300,000. That's approximately 10 teachers. That's another way of looking at it. That money has gone back into frontline services elsewhere. I'm also conscious that in terms of libraries, etc., that my DCAL colleague, Caroline Cullen, has been proactively protecting and investing in libraries as well. So I have to look and see what other departments are doing as well, and then say, well, if another department can provide, and libraries are free access, and I would encourage people to use libraries. They're a great community resource. There is another way of obtaining books. Sorry, Satnus budget is down by £100,000 to £300,000.
I know you rightly say you've had to make tough decisions. Now, we had a debate about STEM subjects and so on the other day. There's no disagreement at all about the importance of that aspect of what you do. Can you really justify something like taking money out of an organisation that does such good work, such as Sentinels?
I don't think it's my job to justify this budget, as strange as that may sound. Okay, I'm dealing with a budget which is being dealt to us by the Westminster government. We have an executive which has lost £1 billion in funding over this last 4 years. My job is to deal with this budget and protect frontline services as much as I possibly can and mitigate against the worst excesses of policy set elsewhere. So, in normal circumstances, would I put £100,000 back into Sentinels? Yes, I would. But this is not normal circumstances. And £100,000, and be conscious of this at this stage, I'm reallocating funds within my own department. I'm moving money about to try and protect services elsewhere. Sentinel still has a budget of £300,000, which will be able to allow to do significant work.
All right. I don't know what we're all going to do if the Conservative government isn't returned, and we're not out of that excuse, because I can't help thinking that a Labour government will have to do exactly the same thing, but we'll see. You know.
So, if a Labour government does the exact same thing, it will have the exact same consequences on our public services.
All right. The teachers' pension scheme, there's I think it's a 4-year liability now, around about 35 million a year. How is that catered for? It seems like a huge amount.
That's being dealt with centrally, and it formed part of the overall budget discussions and budget document, as far as I'm aware. But that's being dealt with centrally through negotiations with DFP and HMT, and there is a fund set aside to deal with that. It is approximately cost to education, and I think 35 million covers both education and Dale. So there is that round, but that's being dealt with centrally.
Does that mean it's not coming out of your budget?
No, it's not a pressure on my budget.
Right, okay. Home to school transport. You seem to have a determination to reduce that budget from 70 million per annum. Fair enough, you know. How are you going to do it?
Well, the review which I published, I think it was pre-Christmas now, I published that review. That's
to catch up.
That is going to go out to public consultation. It wasn't a consultation, in fairness. I published it to allow and inform both members and the public of what was in the review. That will have to go out to consultation. There's quite a significant number of recommendations in it, some challenging recommendations in it. That will have to go through the consultation process and move forward. And in relation to how the transport budget is now dealt with in year, that's a discussion and a decision for the Education Authority. That'd be right.
Just one more, Chair, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Just on the capital budget, now we have a list of, in the paper, a list of schools in the various stage of the process that they're at. Does the reduction, the ongoing reductions in the capital budget affect those projects?
We have made a decision. Sorry for interrupting you. Go ahead.
No, are they pushed back? And I wonder what happens in the case of it. For no particular reason, I'll mention one project, only because it's one of the most recently announced, and it's not in Lagan Valley. It couldn't be further away. Right. It's Enniskillen. Right. It's the Portora Collegiate. Now, that's the most recent major scheme, I think, that has been announced or decision you have made. So, in present circumstances, is there any kind of a timescale for that?
That project is at the very, very early stages of planning.
I know.
And wouldn't be affected by the 15-16 budget in any case. Even in the 15-16 budget, if my cup runneth over with capital funds, it wouldn't be affected by that budget. But in terms of...
could you even start the process?
Well, the process has begun in terms of planning for construction.
Right.
You know, and it's not just sitting on a shelf somewhere. The process, but there's quite a lengthy process from announcement to starting an actual building programme. Yeah. So that process isn't changed. That's moving forward, and all those works are being carried out. But the point I'm making is, if I had twice or three times the capital budget in 15-16 I currently have, I wouldn't be laying any bricks in Enniskillen for that project this year. In terms of the overall capital budget, it's down almost 20%. Significant impact. We have made a decision to move ahead with the major works. They're not going to be impacted. Minor works which are programmed and are on site will continue to move forward, but there is a detrimental impact on the school enhancement project.
But the ones, let's take the ones that are almost at the point of being on site. They're not going to be held back.
No, they're going to move ahead.
Okay.
Thank you. Before I go to Chris, I just want to on two things that Trevor raised. One was when you're talking about Sentinels, did you take into account the match funding and how that would affect them? If you take off so much from them, they then lose more funding elsewhere.
Well, I appreciate that, but they still have an opportunity to obtain match funding for the budgets they have, and alleviate some of the pressures on them, but I still have pressures within my own budgets, which I have to deal with.
And then the other is when we're talking about the pensions, and I think it was the 37 million. Is that all still planned to come out of the pot for the next 3-4 years? Because I think we were told yesterday that there's 4 years of money that has to be found.
Well, I understand that's the plan moving forward. I understand that the pension strategy is an agreed strategy at Westminster between whichever government or whichever parties in government next time round. That they're still in this trajectory of travel in terms of pensions. So that's a decision. Well, firstly, hopefully will be made at Westminster if they are going down that road, and then that will allow the executive to obtain the funds from that central pot at Westminster to deal with our own budgetary pressures here as well.
And here it'll come out of our central pot rather than out of the education budget.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Chris.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Minister, for the report this morning. I noticed you've made reference to a £10 million injection for the Education Authority. I'm just wondering what will the effect of that be, and how is that even possible? Or
well, it's possible from the draft budget until now, because I have taken measures within my own budget to secure £28 million. I know that involved a number of projects coming to an end and a reduction in other costs, but it was an attempt to balance our budget, because we have £97 million of pressures, but we thought it was prudent and good financial management to set aside a pot of money, because there is a reliance on schools meeting their targets and the Education Authority meeting their targets. So we had a £28 million pot. I decided to use £10 million of that immediately and put it into the Education Authority to alleviate the significant pressures on the Education Authority, because they have significant pay and price pressures, and they also have significant pressures in and around special educational needs, as well as other pressures. So we have injected £10 million immediately. They still have a pressure of around £9.9 million, which they will have to deal with. And as I said, I will use the other monies set aside. None of those are coming out at a strategic time, and as I say, I may get to a point where I never have the opportunity to use them, because they may just have to simply be used to balance the budget. I hope I get to a stage where I inject them into frontline services.
Obviously, you know, when yourself and the department sit down to, you know, talk about programme for government commitments and, you know, business plan targets, these aren't the sort of financial economic climate that you like to be sitting in. To what extent does a budget like this hamper your ability to deliver upon programme for government commitments? And, you know, what can you do to, you know, mitigate that and to make sure that you do?
Well, when we were sitting down going through the budget, we were also matching it against our programme for government targets, and doing our best to ensure that we do not take actions which make it impossible to reach those programme for government targets, though I think some of them will be more challenging moving into the future. But and in terms of our work programme, we have to review our work programme in terms of how we move forward, and match that against the budget available and what we can deliver as a department. And it's also worth noting in terms of my own department, in terms of the spending power of the Department of Education, as in Rathgale House and Waterside House, there's a 9% cut to that. So we won't have the same amount of resources to deliver the same number of programmes as we once would have hoped.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Sean?
Thanks. You're very welcome, Minister. I suppose you mentioned frontline services a number of times this morning. And just carrying on from Chris's point, do you expect that in the future programme for government, the targets would have to be readjusted, considering the particular cuts that are impacting on us here now?
Well, this is moving into 15-16 in terms of the programme for government targets for that. They will be reviewed and have to be reviewed. The last programme for government ran 14-15, so those have to be reviewed anyhow. But as I said to Mr Hazard, as we were going through our budget, we were matching it against our programme for government targets and endeavouring to ensure that they were still deliverable. There may be significant pressures to deliver them, but we certainly didn't want to make it impossible to deliver them. And
just going on from that, you know, in terms of education, we all have seen over this last number of years that early intervention really, really works. How can we really have effective early intervention if early years is losing 2 million, Sure Start is losing $1 million, SEN support is losing nearly 5 million? Because, you know, I spoke to speech therapists yesterday, and somewhere between 20% and 50% of our children are even presenting themselves with language acquisition problems at a very, very early stage. And if we don't get the ability to communicate right, you know, we're in a hiding to nothing. So, how are we going to manage this?
One of the reasons I included a further £10 million into the Education Authority was because I recognise the specific pressures they have around the delivery of SEN. I have also ring-fenced SEN spending in the Education Authority. Now, the Education Authority board members may be somewhat annoyed about that, and they may believe that I'm interfering in their processes. But there's a number of areas I will be ring-fencing when I'm sending the budget to the Education Authority. That will include SEN, youth, early years. Will also be included, and a number of others which I'll supply the committee with to assist to protect those services as much as possible. I'm also conscious, and I've raised this several times with executive colleagues, that I will be making bids in year for further funds for SEN, because those costs are rising, and I'll be making bids for those. And if need be, I'll attempt to assist the Education Authority as much as possible from whatever, and it will be very limited resources within my own budget moving forward throughout the year. In terms of early years, etc., there's one budget line that has been reduced significantly, but there's still significant investment going into early year spending. We will still be able to provide every child that wishes it a preschool place. We will still be providing somewhere in the region of £23 million into Sure Start moving forward. So there's still significant investment going into early years provision. £26.6 million will be going into early years provision in the next financial year. There will be no child displaced from an early years provision or preschool setting moving forward. So yes, there will be challenges for early years because of that budget reduction. There will have to be a change in some patterns around that. But in terms of SEN, I have ring-fenced that spending, and I will do everything within my power to obtain further funds for them.
Thanks for that. I would agree that there will be early years provision, but will it be the depth and quality of early years provision that we have at the minute, or even when you talk to these people that are involved in early years or in Sure Start or whatever, how they want to enhance their programmes? I think that's part of the issue.
I think we will be. I'm confident we will be able to maintain the level of service. Of course, we would want to enhance it. I don't think we're in a position to enhance it, but I do believe we can maintain the level of service we currently have for our young people in early interventions. And there's a number of departments involved in early interventions. Health are involved in early intervention, and I know DSD also spend, in terms, Mr McCausland would be aware of this from his time on it, they also spend in terms of early interventions as well.
And in terms of frontline services, the next part of my question really is about the youth service. And you know that really 95% of the department's funded youth service is delivered by voluntary youth people. That £1 million reduction in their budget, is there any possibility that can be focused on maybe reducing bureaucracy rather than reducing any of the frontline services?
Well, you've read my mind on that issue, and you're referring to the Youth Council budget. There's also youth funding going into the education, or the Education Authority as now is, which hasn't been affected by any reduction. But the Youth Council budget was £5.1 million. I'm proposing, and I will be reducing it by £1 million. But the administration costs of that are quite alarming. There's an administration cost of £800,000 to distribute £4.3 million. It's a 16% administration cost. I don't think that's acceptable. I also think that we have to, and this goes back to an earlier question about our priorities and how we run our education system. I'm not sure the most effective way to deliver that funding is through a separate organisation. I think we have to seriously consider bringing services funded by the Youth Council under the authority of the Education Authority and cut back on administration and keep the funding for frontline youth services moving into the future. I don't think we have the luxury anymore of funding a separate organisation from the Youth Council. I do believe it should be brought under the Education Authority. But with the targets and the principles behind the Youth Council remaining in place, but the funding being distributed through that one body.
Yeah, that's welcome, because there's some fantastic work going on there.
Yeah.
And there's probably 60 to 70% of the young people that are involved that are coming from the private
Exactly, yeah.
world. So thanks for that. You did mention there in passing too about the school enhancement project was, if in the future, would be under pressure. Could maybe elaborate a wee bit more than that?
We have around 50 projects in the pipeline in relation to the school enhancement programme. And the projects have moved forward quite quickly, and it's a credit to Philip and his team as to how quickly we've been able to move these projects forward. But I simply don't have the budget to move them all forward as quickly as they would like to at this stage. We have around 21 which will be moving forward. They have been notified. The other projects will be notified today that there is going to be a delay to them. But we do have them at such a stage where we will be able to use in-year funding in terms of capital. Now, that's if capital becomes available through the year, and I will be making bids to in-year monitoring rounds for capital, because we do have them at that advanced stage. It used to be the case in education where we wouldn't have had any projects advanced enough to use in-year capital. Thanks to the work of Philip and his team and others, we are now at the stage where we will be able to use in-year funding.
Thank you. And when do you expect schools will receive their budget notification of budget allocation for next year?
Schools have received it. They received, I think, last Wednesday. Last Wednesday. Yeah, last Wednesday they received it. Now there will be other programme lines and budget lines that their various managing authorities will notify them of as well.
And just one more, Chair. In terms of the time work framework, the cuts to the time work framework, will that have a detrimental effect on the target you're trying to get schools to have the required number of GCSE and A-level subjects? Because there's 70 or 80%. Every school hasn't managed that yet.
Well, this is no longer an add-on. This is an integral part of our curriculum. The entitlement framework has been in planning since 2006. Additional funding was provided to schools to assist them in preparation to be ready for the delivery of the entitlement framework. The funding was supposed to end a couple of years ago, and I've kept it in place. Now it's been reducing year on year, but schools should be preparing, and I would argue this even in better financial times, that schools should be preparing for the end of that funding. It was never intended to be long-term. It was a short-term intervention to allow schools to prepare for that, and schools should prepare for that funding to come to an end.
Thanks, Minister. Thanks.
Yeah. Minister, before we go to Nelson, you mentioned the ring fencing of SEN youth and early years. Will that be for the next 4 years or just for the next 4 years?
I'm only a one-year budget, so beyond that, it's a matter for someone else.
Okay, thank you. Nelson.
Okay, thanks. Minister, in regard to the curriculum development budget there, that's been reduced from a baseline of £2 million by 1.6 million, and you're left then with 0.4 million, so that's it's an 80% cut.
Yep.
How will that happen? What will be left?
Well, that will happen. There will be an end to the languages programme in our primary schools, which is a very regrettable position to be in. Introducing young people to languages at an early stage is very important. I would hope that some schools continue to carry that practice on, and indeed there was a number of schools who would have enhanced the programme already and would have brought in additional support under the languages programme, but that is going to be achieved through the ending of the languages programme in primary schools.
And that will deliver the entire 1.6 million?
And STEM, there'll be a STEM element of that of 0.6 million.
And that will go as well?
Yeah.
Just for clarity, is that, when you say you will end the languages in primary school programme, is that the project that that CCEA wrote out about recently to primary schools?
No, this is a separate programme.
Oh, so there will still be, we're ending the languages programme in primary schools, but we're encouraging, or will there be money set aside then for the other?
Sorry?
Will there be money set aside then for the project that you were writing about?
I just want to clarify that, and I'll confirm that with you. I believe this is to be a separate programme, but there just appears to be some doubt on that. But I will confirm with you one way or another whether this is a separate programme. in relation to the SIA programme, which you refer to. I think the SIA, the letters which were sent out from SIA were about the preparation of a scheme rather than the delivery of a scheme.
So you could be in a situation where you end a scheme because there's no money and start another scheme.
Well, it depends, and you'll appreciate I don't have every subsection of the budget in front of me. That scheme in relation to SIA may have already been funded out of a budget line within SIA or elsewhere. But I'll confirm that all for you.
Right. It would be helpful to get some real clarity around what the impact will be in terms of curriculum development. The second thing I wanted to ask was a point that John Rogers raised earlier about the Youth Council. And it seems to me that the work that is supported by the Youth Council, significant element is work around youth organisations, scouts and so on. I'm not sure that you'll be able to make or that they will be able to make £1 million of savings simply by, it talks there about administration and support. I have no difficulty with reducing administration, but for many of those organisations that are delivering youth work and are heavily reliant, in fact almost entirely reliant on volunteers, or you have an organisation that is almost entirely dependent on volunteers, quite often that central support is hugely important because of the fact that it is volunteers that are delivering. And secondly, you get a big return, there's a big multiplier factor on any investment in support, because the investment in support gets the return of all of the volunteers' freely given time. Would you not have a concern that by removing not the admin bit but the support arrangements, that will have a detrimental effect on a very large section of youth work in Northern Ireland?
Well, I'm not suggesting it's going to have a positive impact. None of the decisions, or very few of them.
If I could say devastating effect.
Well, I may not agree with the term devastating. It's not going to have a positive impact. However, I am of the view that the Youth Council is a luxury our society cannot afford, and we should be delivering that money to those organisations you refer to in a different way, and I believe the best way to deliver that is through the Education Authority. Now, the Youth Council is formed through legislation, through primary legislation, and if you remove it, you have to remove the primary legislation, and that will take a considerable period of time. But I do believe that we have to start moving towards that direction. I don't underestimate the impact of any of the reductions in spending. I'm making across a wide range of budgetary areas here. I don't underestimate the impact it's going to have on the Youth Council, but I don't find it acceptable that an organisation is spending £800,000 on administration to then deliver £4.3 million of funding. It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
When you say £800,000 on administration, Chair, when the Minister says £800,000 on administration, is that entirely administration, or is some of that actually support?
Well, it's under the heading of administration in the documents I've been provided with.
Okay. And if it was to be the case that in fact some of that was actually support for the organisations, would that have an impact?
No.
Maybe a longer term aim to abolish the Youth Council. I don't know if that's been conveyed to them yet or not. But if that is the case, in the interim, by simply stripping out all of that money, there could be a result in the interim period, whatever the long-term aim, of removing support from organisations that need it in the interim period.
Then I would have to take the money from somewhere else. I have ring-fenced youth support in the Education Authority, quite a substantial budget within the Education Authority for youth support. So in total, you're probably talking in a region of
28 or something.
Around £28 million in the boards. Add to that the £4 million which will remain in the Youth Council. That's £32 million going into youth projects. It's still quite a healthy budget.
I would suggest that traditionally the view across all political parties has been that youth has been somewhat the Cinderella element within education.
But I've also increased youth funding during my tenure as Minister by somewhere in the region of £4 million. I also have ring-fenced youth services in my tenure as Minister. And if the member has a suggestion as to where else I should take the £1 million from, I'm more than happy to listen to him.
Well, Chair, I wasn't going to suggest that there should be no reduction. I was simply suggesting that it needs to be looked at again, or suggesting it should be looked at again, to ascertain clearly the difference between admin and support, so that there's no detrimental effect on the frontline organisations.
I mean, that was certainly the lobbying we were getting, is to sort out the bureaucracy and spend less on it. But equally, if we're going to move it to Education Authority, we've got to make sure we do it more efficiently there as well.
But there could be a huge amount of damage to the organisations in the interim period.
Yes, but whether it's administration in the Youth Council directly or administration in the organisations, why would you spend £800,000, 16% of a budget to administer? No business would run like that. You know, why would you spend 16%, whether it's directly in the body itself or outside the body? It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
I have to say, Chair, it does concern me a wee bit here. I think some folk may have a clear understanding of how the traditional youth club works and how that's funded. I think may not always have quite the same depth of understanding in regard to how those youth organisations, the Scouts and the Guides and so on, operate, and the key role, the central role of that central support in maintaining what is a province-wide service. I would simply ask, would the Minister consider looking again at that in relation to the distinction between support, because that will have a huge impact on the practical working of those. They don't operate, each element of the Scouts, each Scout troop doesn't operate in total independence. They need that central support. It's different from running a youth club.
I think point very much taken, but we'll come back to that.
Thank you.
Okay. Robin.
Thank you, Chair, and I welcome the Minister to the meeting today. And I want to kind of just ask for clarification on a couple of points. First, Minister, given the unanimity of the debate on Monday around the STEM issues, and given the priority within particularly within the DETI department to STEM, it is a bit. Well, it's very disappointing to understand that Sentinus is going to be impacted upon, but perhaps even more so that primary schools, where we really do need to encourage interest in the STEM subjects, is also going to be impacted upon. And I know you will understand the need for children to be engaged in those subjects in a manner which is both interesting, innovative and encouraging to them prior to them actually becoming seriously engaged in the subjects. So that is disappointing to understand within the budget. In terms of the third-party organisations that are going to be impacted upon, when will we know who those and the extent of their which third-party organisations and the impact on their budget?
And in terms of third-party organisations, I will ensure members are informed within the next couple of days and those details. Some of those organisations are only being notified today as well of their budgets, so I'll ensure members are informed in the next number of days. I accept your point in around STEM in terms of the discussions and the debate and the vote in the Assembly in this last number of days, but the Assembly also voted overwhelmingly to put money into frontline service in terms of schools' budgets and rejected an amendment which suggested that youth services and other services should also be funded. So it also brings me back to Mr McCaughlin's point around the Youth Council. The Assembly made a conscious decision to vote in support of schools and rejected an amendment which supported other educational services. I can't spin all those plates. STEM, the funding for STEM is additional and above the funding given to schools to deliver the curriculum. And while we would like to be in a position to give further funding for different curriculum items, schools are still given core funding to deliver the curriculum. The world around us at primary schools is part of the curriculum. Primary schools are teaching the world around us. I accept they would have used STEM resources. There's still STEM resources in place, not as much as there once was. But I believe that we still can and will be delivering STEM through the world around us in our primary schools moving forward as well.
Can I just ask you about the travel to school? And don't want to understand what you've said earlier, but again, given recent incidents and indeed that any changes and any possibilities of savings in that area, where would the area be that you would concentrate to look at those those savings?
Well, I don't think I should preempt the public consultation. The document which was published, or the report which was published pre-Christmas by the independent body, sets out a significant number of recommendations. I think it's right and proper that we put those which are required to go to consultation, because some of them I don't think require consultation, they're more procedural matters, but we will certainly be flexible around that matter. But with those recommendations that go out to consultation, allow the consultation process to take place and then for decisions to take place after that, rather than me sitting here saying, well, I think you should do A, B and C. There's an independent report. Let's hear what the public have to say about it.
The community education initiatives which are just being wiped out, and I believe you personally understand the need to address community education, and there will be many of our young people who are facing challenges, and you've wiped out community education initiatives, but you also indicate in paragraph 42 tackling educational inequalities. Many young people need the community education approach to address the educational inequalities, and if we take one away, we take a primary building block away, then, and particularly, I would argue particularly around inner city areas, then we are going to face a challenge in actually tackling the educational inequalities. And can I just maybe add on to that, and maybe you can, because I do believe in the youth work area, and I would particularly argue the case for detached youth work, which indeed ties into the two areas, or certainly the tackling education inequalities. And if we're doing away with the £2 million budget there, are we going to also have an impact on the detached youth work?
Well, the elements of that youth work are decisions to be taken by the EA, right? And as I said, I've already ring-fenced youth services funding in the EA, so how it's distributed on the ground and how it is utilised will be a decision for that body. However, contained within that was also a fund I set up to target areas of social deprivation, which will also be ring-fenced. So that money will continue to go into those areas of social deprivation. And I do believe some of that was used, particularly by the Belfast Board, for outreach workers, etc. But again, the fund I can secure, but I do believe how the fund is used will be a decision for the Education Authority and those teams. The £2 million for community engagement, I established that fund 2 years ago. I do know the worth of it, I do know the value of it, but I'm sitting here with a budget which is very, very difficult, both in terms to establish and will be very, very difficult for those staff and teams to deliver on the ground. There are still community initiatives and projects in place. There will still be funding in around achieving Belfast Area. There's still also the opportunity for the Education Authority to put funding into various community schemes, as I know some of the boards did in the past anyhow. So there are still funding options out there. Many of the elements you see before you today were additional budgets added on to projects which were already being funded from elsewhere. I was topping up the budgets. Because I have removed £2 million doesn't mean that community projects should end. I do accept there may be less of them, there may be less or a significant less intensity around some of them, but there's still budgets there that can be utilised.
Okay, thank you very much. Can I just, Minister, take you back to when you were talking about the home to transport, that no decisions at all been made, even if it's about walking distances and things, until you've gone through the whole consultation process?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Sandra.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to ask him about that too.
I'm sorry.
That's good. With regard to the Skills Enhancement Programme, then you said that there's 21 projects that have been cut off. How did you define those 21 projects?
In state of readiness. So they were ready to go on the ground and prepare for building work to take place.
So they've all received permission and they're all ready to go?
Well, they're all ready. They're
Underway.
No, yeah.
So, so will there be any that have received planning permission now that won't be included?
There are a further 9 that have already had all the design work complete, that are ready to go, and if we had the budget we could release. We have held those in date order at which they were approved, if you like, the design was approved. So as and when the budget becomes available, we'll be able to release those in the order they were approved.
Right, so not planning permission, but design date order?
Well, everything ready to go, so that would be whatever approvals are required.
Okay, and so will the schools know?
We'll be running out to the schools today.
Will they know the position that they're in? Do you know, will they be able to identify what's the time frame?
Well,
when they're going to be able to move?
Unfortunately, they won't be able to identify the time frame because we're not able to identify in terms of delivery.
Yeah.
It will depend on how successful we are in the year in bidding for capital funds.
Okay, so I mean, will they be able to know where next on the list we're going to be? Maybe
happy to let them know where they are on the list.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay, so I suppose, I mean, it's going to be really disappointing for those schools that have plan permission and they are ready to go, but yet, you know, I suppose they've been battling to get to this stage, and then, but there's only so many coming forward, and so we're talking about in year monitoring rounds then, and that's going to be the next. So they're going to be
for this year. We're talking about in year monitoring rounds. It will depend on what the budget is for the next financial year, what the capital budget is for the next financial year. But we are, for the first time in many years, we're in a position now where we have shovel-ready projects in education. For many years we were disadvantaged because we were not at that stage with projects. We now are there, shovel-ready projects, ready to go ahead if capital funding becomes available. We can utilise it.
Okay. I know there are some schools on that you know, really want new builds, and obviously they've gone down this route for enhancement, and you know, they really are in dire need to have an enhancement programme, but does that come into consideration at all in their priority?
They wouldn't have been on the list if they weren't in need in the first place.
Yep.
So the very fact that they're on the list, they come through the criteria to be accepted into the school enhancement programme. We have accepted need. We have accepted need for the new development at their school. The simple fact of the matter is we do not have the money to deliver the project at this stage this year. We may have capital funds available as the year goes on. I don't know. But I can assure you we have taken every measure we can to secure whatever funds are available. We have moved as many projects forward as possible. And I understand the disappointment of the schools. I'm not looking forward to writing out to the schools, I can assure you, because these are schools which are dedicated to the delivery of excellent education to their young people. They want to improve their facilities. So I know this is going to be a huge disappointment to them.
I'm sure you'll appreciate that this will have a knock-on effect on their ability to save money elsewhere, because if they don't have those facilities, they're going to have to go outside the school to pay for facilities outside, and so they're not going to be able to make the savings in school.
Well, I'm not going to write them a blank cheque either.
I don't think they want a blank cheque.
Schools will have to live within their budget, and they'll have to agree their plan with the Education Authority, and they'll have to go through all those processes. And if there's issues which they believe are unique to their school, they'll have to have those discussions with their managing authority in terms of funding management.
Okay. Right. Well, thank you for the responses, and I think on my other questions with regard to STEM, youth services, etc., have all been answered. So thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you, Maeve.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister. Just to clarify a couple of points, first of all, the youth service budget, and I say this as somebody who has a background in community and youth work, talking, is it in the region of 32 million?
Between the education boards, or the education authority, and the youth council.
Yeah, and in relation to the, I suppose, evaluation rollout of the particular programmes you were indicating, that's down to the new education authority. I suppose what I'm trying to get to is what mechanisms are in place to ensure the correct outcomes. And I say that because I think when we look at £800,000 in terms of admin, it brings up many challenges. And I think that quite often there's hugely, immensely valuable work that goes on in the sector. There's no doubt about that. But oftentimes they may not have delivered the outcomes that are required. So I'm keen to see what mechanism the ESA can use in terms of their requirements to ensure proper outcomes in terms of areas of need.
Okay, well, we introduced a new youth policy 2 years ago, Priorities for Youth, and youth work is to be planned and measured against that policy. So that will be in terms of the measuring stick for the Education Authority moving forward, as it has been for this last number of years for the boards. In terms of priorities and delivery, the Education Authority will be making those decisions. Though, as I say, I have ring-fenced the Education Authority's youth service budget, and within that I'm ring-fencing the additional money I provided a number of years ago for areas of social deprivation within that as well. Now, how that funding is used on the ground will be a matter for the authority. They'll be best placed in conjunction and discussion with local communities as to how that money provides the best outcomes for young people and youth services. But the grant or the funding, I have taken the measures to protect it.
Okay, and I mean it's a similar vein, I suppose, but in relation to the 10 million additional money that you'd made available in the last round for target and social need, is that now within the overall schools budget?
Yes, but it is funded. The common funding formula scheme which we put in place last year remains. So the £10 million injection has been targeted at schools with high social deprivation. And
that's clearly in place?
Yeah.
Okay. And it's just, Minister, in terms of the overall context, because I do think that this is important as well, and maybe some of the issues that we've seen throughout other budgetary and other departments. And I'm thinking specifically about health and the protection and uplift in health. And one of the key challenges in that is the hard discussion around money going the right directions. And indeed, Chair, you know, the DFP Minister himself has alluded to that on a number of occasions around concerns. My question to you is that, you know, are you assured, are you convinced that in terms of your spend direction in priority, policy priority, it's going the right way? And I suppose following on from that, the restructuring of departments, particularly in terms of, I think, like issues like early intervention and potentially children's services, would suggest at this stage that there will be an increased function and role within the current Department of Education. Is there a conversation about the protection of education going forward at the Executive? Does there need to be a conversation about the protection of education?
Well, I would argue quite strongly that there needs to be a conversation about the protection of education moving forward. I am of the view that in our society that health and education are vital, and I think both then feed into the economic well-being of our society. So it's not a case of ignoring the economy. I believe that education is crucial to a successful economy. I also believe that well-educated populace are also a healthier populace. And are more likely to be in work than those who have a poor educational outcomes. So that conversation, and I was to the Vice Chair of the committee earlier on when he asked me in terms of priorities, etc. I think our society, and the Assembly and politicians and political parties, and along with our trade unions and the third sector, etc., are all going to have a serious conversation about what their priorities are in this society, and what they want to invest in, and what those outcomes are going to be, not just in a year's time, but in 5 and 10 and 15 years' time, and start forward-looking. In terms of in my priorities around funding, I believe I have prioritised as best as we can in terms of moving forward. but I don't believe we have enough money going to all those priorities. There needs to be an injection of money into our public services. And Mr Lunn has said, well, if Labour's return, what are you going to do about excuses around the Tories? I don't mind, I don't care what they call the party. If their policies are the same, then they have the same impact. I would sincerely hope that if the Labour Party is returned to Westminster, that they inject money into public services.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Maeve. Trevor, you wanted to come in again.
Yes, thanks very much for letting me back in again. Minister, we've had a good discussion about STEM, and there's certain aspects of what we do here that are regarded in a worldwide sense as being quite important and beneficial to children. So I'll not go back to STEM, but languages. It's widely held now that the ability to speak and learn a second language is beneficial in terms of a child's overall education. It's actually an argument that's used in terms of Irish language as well, but I'm more thinking of foreign languages. So you really took me by surprise when you said that not only are you affecting the primary school languages budget, but you're doing away with it. Where does that stand in terms of prioritisation of what is best for our children? It's a popular programme. I don't know how much it costs, but it's not just being reduced; it's being discontinued.
Yes, and again, I make the point: this is additional funds towards schools to carry out activities. This does not mean that schools have to stop carrying out language programmes. And I also make the point that a number of schools also brought in their own language teachers over and above what we were providing through this funding. So I'm not suggesting for 1 second that this isn't going to have a significant impact or an impact on our schools or on our languages programme, but it doesn't mean that they should stop. This was always additional money, and this is one of the difficulties sometimes in setting up earmarked funding, that it becomes the sole funder of a programme or a part of the curriculum moving forward. And I go back to the point, when the consultation responses were returned to me, when the Assembly discussed this matter, it was overwhelmingly in support of me putting money directly into the aggregated schools budget. I have protected the aggregated schools budget to the best of my ability. There's still pressures on there, but our primary schools and our post-primary schools will still be able to deliver the curriculum. Included in the curriculum is languages, and I would hope, and indeed I would be expecting, that many of our schools will continue to develop the languages courses they already have in place.
I'll ask him one more, Chair, if you don't mind. The New Education Authority, when we had Gavin Boyd in here last week, the week before, I think maybe you were here too, and he told us more or less that there wouldn't be any more staff savings because the number of people who have already left the boards is about as far as it's possible to go. Now, there's been a lot of talk about administration costs, and you yourself, in a different context a few minutes ago, said you wouldn't run a business like this. The reduction in staff, as far as I can tell, has only been about 15%. And we're talking about 5 major authorities going into one. Are you satisfied with that? Do you think that a 15% reduction, after all what we've been through, I mean, we all regret, some of us regret the loss of East and all the rest of it, but we are where we are, that 15% is a satisfactory figure in terms of saving and staff costs?
Well, you appreciate I wasn't here when the debate and the discussion took place in around the EA, or when Mr Boyd was here or whatever. I'm always uncomfortable, I have to say, when we talk about staff reductions and whether you need 15% or 20%. I much prefer to be talking about employing people rather than reducing the number of employed people. No, I appreciate the point you're making, that if we're reducing costs, we should actually be putting them into frontline services and, you know, into schools, etc., etc. The Education Authority will have to make decisions in the year ahead, driven by a number of factors, but largely by their budget. And they still have £9.9 million of savings to achieve. Some of that will have to be through cost and staff reductions. I don't see where else they're going to achieve those reductions. Now, I believe that they also then have to look as to what savings they can achieve due to the fact that they're bringing 5 organisations together who used to deliver 5 separate and different functions across the board. So I'm reluctant to respond to that direct point because I wasn't here when Mr. Boyd was here. But in terms of moving forward, they're going to have to make that £9.9 million savings next year. Their long-term plans are going to have to be worked out with the authority. But I do expect to see money being delivered into frontline services and a reduction in administration where it's administration for administration's sake.
Thank you.
I mean, I'm coming in on a similar line, Minister. I mean, you indicated that there'll be 1,000 non-teaching redundancies by September 2015. The Education Authority business case indicates that there will be almost no redundancies in the authority's headquarters staff. Will that 1,000 redundancies be school-based? Will it be classroom assistants? And, you know, when we were looking before Christmas, we were looking at a 20 million cut to the LB block grant, and yet we've now got 10 million going in. It does seem that we're not cutting the bureaucracy at your end, but we're doing it all at the schools.
In terms of the non-teaching staff figures, that was always envisaged across schools and in terms of boards and administration across the boards. The £9 million, £9.9 million, which the boards are going to have to achieve, will have to involve staff reductions across the board area, and that's the decisions the Education Authority themselves will have to make. And as I've said to Mr. Lunn, in terms of bringing together services which used to operate back to back rather than front to front and engaging with each other around many services. So there's difficult decisions for the Education Authority moving forward. But they're decisions the Education Authority have to make.
But it does make it look as if the business case was wrong.
Can I just say, if you recall when we had that discussion a couple of weeks ago, it's the net figure in the business case that shows that the Education Authority has only a minor amount of further staff to shake out of the system. There is a grouping around the senior or the middle management tranche where there's about somewhere between 30 and 50 that have to shake out. At the minute, the boards are have cut quite significantly at the lower levels and are possibly below sustainable levels in the lower areas of their grades, and there might have to be a small amount of recruitment there. However, as the Minister rightly says, that will be a decision for the Education Authority in the context of their budget, where they now have to find a 9.9 million saving. So it's not that anything was wrong with the business case. It's just to be clear around the net figure versus the individual figures around the different gradings and what has to be shaken out of the system.
Can we then take that as a guarantee that that's not going to be a knock-on effect to the schools? It won't be their classroom assistants or the other staff who help.
That particular issue is pertinent to the 5 boards coming together into one Education Authority. So that's, if you like to call it headquarters figures.
Because I mean, it still comes down to, can we have a guarantee from the Minister that it isn't going to be a knock-on down to the schools losing their classroom assistants and the other key people?
Well, it depends on what circumstances each decision is made. The Department of Education has a duty to approve the Education Authority's budget, and we will be scrutinising it very, very closely that the decisions they have made are, to the best of the authority's ability, protecting frontline services. And it's difficult to give guarantees around an issue which has yet even to be discussed with the authority, or even indeed the authority have themselves got round the table and started to scrutinise these figures as well.
Okay, Trevor.
The question I asked you is, are you satisfied with the situation which appears to be evolving here? I mean, the 5 boards have struggled manfully. I don't deny they haven't had a difficult few years while we wrestled with their future. But you know, they have managed to operate with the staff reductions that have been happening through natural wastage, through people taking flight, through people getting fed up, and through people acting up. It now appears that, apart from 30 or 40 that you mentioned, Fiona, that there's no more to be saved. But this is 5 into 1. You know, and you did, as I repeat it, you did say you wouldn't run a business like that. Sure. Are you satisfied with, if that was, if this is the final outcome, we only managed to shed, and I'm not looking to sack people, but if we only managed to shed another 30 middle management jobs, Are you satisfied with that?
Well, we have been involved in a reduction of staff in the Education and Library Boards over a 4 or 5 year period, so they have went through a significant staff reduction. I will be satisfied with a plan brought forward to me by the Education Authority, which to the best of the Education Authority's ability protects frontline services. If by doing that they reduce staff by administration staff and middle management by staff, and there will be quite significant savings from 30 staff going at middle management, so be it. But we will be scrutinising it very closely. But allow the Education Authority firstly to be formed, allow the Education Authority to meet, and allow them to have these discussions, and allow the process to evolve. They are dealing with a difficult budget. They aren't dealing with as difficult a budget as they were pre-Christmas, because the 20 million would have been extremely difficult for them to achieve. They still have significant pressures. They still have to estimate in terms of the rising pressures in around SEN, etc. So allow the Education Authority to do its job, and I can assure members of the committee that I will scrutinise their budget very, very closely to ensure that they've done everything within their ability to protect frontline services.
No, thank you. It does concern me still that we have, there's 1,000 redundancies to be made, and you talk of just 30. Maybe authority.
But some of those, and they will be school-based redundancies as well from non-teaching staff, not necessarily from the authority. They will be school-based redundancies as well.
Yeah, the schools need all they can. Sean.
You put a lot of emphasis on the Education Authority and it hasn't got going yet. But do you, as Minister, have a vision that there will be a net reduction in the cost of education administration, say, over the next 5 years?
Well, it probably goes back to Mr. McCausland's point, to fine administration. I want to ensure that we reduce senior management and bureaucracy down to the stage where as much money as possible is going into frontline services. But the EA is still going to be running quite a significant budget, which is going to require administration to run that budget. But I will be, as I say, I'm repeating it for sake, because it's important to note, when I scrutinise the budget coming to me from the Education Authority, or as to how they propose to spend their budget, I will be looking at it from the point of view, well, how are you protecting frontline services? We don't want to get into a situation where we have a bloated administration. I don't think the members of the authority want to get into a position where we have a bloated administration. But there are decisions which firstly they have to make, and then they have to be signed off by the Department of Education. So let the conversation begin.
Thank you, Nelson. Oh, sorry, Robin, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. It's very simple. Building on what Trevor and Sean were saying, on the last occasion, Minister, that your officials were with us, they indicated that they would send to us the critical path analysis document that they were working to in the formation of the ESA on it. We have received it.
We just got it. I think we just got it yesterday evening in next week's paper. Sorry, members.
I knew you'd be asking that question.
Okay, thank you.
Robin will be on with the change management.
Okay, Nelson.
Yep, thank you. There was a note there in some of our papers about a review of the operation of CCMS, Synergy, NICE and Youth Council. Are those reviews underway at the moment?
Yes.
When would they be completed?
A number of them are completed, but the actions coming out of them have not yet been agreed. Others will have to be commenced moving forward, and decisions to be made as to whether it's worthwhile holding a review or more substantive action being taken.
Thank you. Minister, I know you've reached time, but Sandra would like to come in with one question.
Sorry, just to delay slightly. About the school catering, you wanted to find some reductions in the school catering. How do you propose to do that?
It's through additional funding which was provided over a number of years to prepare schools for the nutritional element of school catering, the improvement around nutrition. That investment has taken place over a number of years now. Schools and equipment have been invested in. We're now going to remove that, which is around £4.4 million of investment in the school nutritional value. Meals nutritional standards, sorry. That's now being removed, but we don't believe that there should be any reduction in the nutritional value of school meals being served in school canteens.
So you think they've learned it all, so they should be able to implement what the bill is? Is that what you mean?
I think we're a much more advanced state than we were 5 or 6 years ago. since 2007 this funding has been in place, so it's 7 years of investment in equipment and training, etc. We have high quality school meals being produced. I don't believe that will be reduced going into the future.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. And Minister, can I thank you and Fiona, and Philip and Stephen all for your time. I still have great concerns about the redundancies and the STEM cuts, but those will come out in the future.
Sure, I share the concerns moving forward. The budget we are being presented with is not, I don't believe, the way forward for education, but decisions are being made elsewhere which forces the executive to carry out measures which I don't believe that the executive want to do. But I believe in the absence of the executive, our education, our health services and other services would be decimated by others of a different political philosophy.
Thank you, and thank you very much for your time. Thank you. Okay, members, have you got any points you want to raise or any views before we go for a summary and then move on?
Giving the budgets again.
Will we be writing now in regard to that issue around the curriculum development and the languages programme? What it was, what is stopping, and what's starting or might start or won't start, as the case might be?
So, Chair, in sum, would the committee like to write to the Minister expressing some concerns around the redundancies and the timelines, seeking further clarification on the non-teaching redundancies, expressing some concerns about the cuts to funding for STEM and indeed for the languages programme at primary, and also seeking clarity around the curriculum development changes which were mentioned.
And what relationship that has to the thing that he wrote out, or CCEA wrote out about?
And IMA, and also around expressing concerns around the cuts to youth funding as well as indicated.
Yeah.
And perhaps also then seeking the review of Sure Start, information on the Education Authority's ring-fenced budget elements, information on third-party funding, third-party organisation funding, the consultation report. The Minister made reference to a management side report on the future of education. Have a look at that. Seeking clarity on the school enhancement programme, so they indicated 21 projects there of the 50 that had originally been on, and also perhaps the Chair had mentioned this to me earlier about the aggregated schools budget, just seeking further information on the numbers in the schools and the size of the budget, and if there's anything else.
Thank you. Robin, you
Chair, just within the youth work, could we specifically mention the detached youth work, which is maybe more critical in a city area than another? And indeed also the community education, where the Minister seemed to indicate in both of those areas that the new authority might actually make decisions in favour of those areas.
Chair, just to clarify for members, community education initiatives, that funding is now discontinued, as members are aware.
I thought that what he was saying was he wouldn't rule out that the new education authority might pick that up.
So what the members also want to know then is the 2015-16 budget for the Education Authority, because if you look on the spreadsheet, that's all blank. Yeah. So yes.
Can I maybe just on that, Chair? I mean, the point I think to be made is, and I accept that the Minister would want to address the inequalities in tackling educational inequalities as it's defined. It just seems to me that primary to that, tackling that, is the community initiatives. If you remove one, you have a huge impact upon the other, and particularly if the detached youth work is removed. It's just, I fail to see, if you don't have those building blocks, how you can actually tackle the educational inequalities.
I understand. Also, he raised, when he was talking about ring fencing, that the social deprivation budget would be ring fenced. I mean, that's similar. Yeah. It wasn't one of the three that he mentioned before, and I just wondered if there's anything else that's being ring-fenced that we didn't.
If we're bringing together 5 youth services under an education authority, they don't all at the moment do things in exactly the same way. And there was an attempt some years ago to do a piece of work about how you would standardise things across them and ensure more uniform provision. And some areas rely heavily on statutory youth clubs through the Education Ivory Board, some rely heavily on voluntary. And there are huge disparities even within a single board. You have one area where there was one case where we had £49 per child in an area and 49p was roughly in the next area. So could we say put something here about emphasising this issue about getting a system which will be equitable across while taking account of social deprivation, but noting that any changes will need to be handled very carefully?
Okay, how do we get through?
Right.
Ask for a briefing.
The committee can indicate that its view. I think the department's answer will be that will be priorities for youth. No, that's priorities for youth.
Yeah.
That's what the plan was, that you would have a continuity and consistency of delivery across Northern Ireland, and there would be less money on administration and more on the frontline service. But I think the member is probably indicating a view held by the committee generally that yes, youth services should be consistently available across Northern Ireland, should recognise deprivation, but at the same time recognise local need, I think, and that the change from where we are to where they want to be needs to be managed appropriately.
Okay.
It's just something occurs to me because we're sitting in my own constituency. You cross over from the Belfast Board to the North Eastern Board. Things aren't necessarily done in the same way. You can see the differences.
Okay, got that. Okay. If we can then move on to item number 6, which is the Shared and Integrated Education Inquiry, the early years briefing, where we have an oral briefing. Can I refer members to the clerk's cover note at page 107 and refer members to the submission to the inquiry from the Early Years Organisation? And can I welcome the following witnesses? Very good to see you. Siobhan Fitzpatrick, Chief Executive Officer, and Pauline Walmsley, Director of Knowledge Exchange. And can I invite you to make an opening statement?
Thank you very much, Chair. I suppose before we start, we had an opportunity to listen to the previous discussion on the budget, and we were absolutely horrified to learn, without any consultation, that £2 million has been cut from the DE Early Years Fund, which will have an enormous impact on the delivery of early years services. We've just heard about this, that we'll be analysing the impact, but we felt it was important to make our point. In relation to the shared education paper, we have submitted a paper, and I will speak to the paper, and we will welcome any questions. Early Years, the Organisation for Young Children, have been operating in Northern Ireland for 50 years, since 1965. And one of our key objectives when we started was to establish high-quality early years services that were on a cross-community and a shared basis and inclusive. And right from the inception of the organisation, that has been the case. Thousands of communities across Northern Ireland in operating early years services that are shared, that are operating on a cross-community basis. However, despite the nature and commitment of sharing in early years, we also discovered, and I think it has been the impact of the nature of the society that these services have operated in over the last 50 years, that to fully embrace an inclusive, anti-sectarian approach to early years care and education, that staff in settings, parents attending settings, management committees also needed access to high-quality support, capacity building and training in terms of really making those services shared services. And that led us to the introduction of a flagship project that has been used in preschool services and latterly in the primary schools, a programme called the Media Initiative Respecting Difference programme, which really supports staff, management committees, parents and children fully embrace an approach to sharing that respects the religious, cultural and ethnic identities of all children and all communities represented in those services. The programme has been subject to a large random control trial, a number of qualitative and process evaluations, and it has been highlighted as a very successful programme in terms of enabling parents, teachers and children to move away from a situation of mistrust, lack of knowledge of other, and with confidence implement in preschool and primary school settings curricula that really does reflect the nature of the society that children, families, schools and preschools operate in. So we welcome the attention to shared education. We were very much involved in the Ministerial Advisory Group, had the opportunity to bring representatives from the Ministerial Advisory Group to see services in practice. But if we are to fully support an agenda of shared education, we feel that it isn't just appropriate to provide money to schools and ask them to get on with it. We really believe there needs to be attention to capacity building for preschools and schools. We really believe that there needs to be attention to the current preschool and foundation curriculum that really does embrace an approach to respecting difference and sharing within the curriculum, not just expecting teachers and children to come together to achieve narrow educational outcomes. We believe that if teachers and those associated with supporting children, management committees and ancillary staff are to fully embrace a shared education agenda, then initial and ongoing teacher training also needs to be reformed to ensure that teachers in particular have an opportunity to explore their own experience of difference in the past and gain skills and strategies to fully embrace a shared approach to education. We do know that the work that we're doing in the preschool sector, the informal sector, has not been trammelled by many of the controls that maybe the formal sector has been in the past, and that work is viewed internationally in other areas of division as an exemplar in terms of practice. And we would welcome an opportunity for the approach that has been developed in preschool to roll up the system, as opposed to what often happens, that initiatives that are in the formal sector roll down to the preschool. But we do believe that there's an opportunity to create strategies and structures that will allow young children and older children and the youth sector here in Northern Ireland to begin to experience a very different educational experience than maybe the children have experienced in the past. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you're an organisation, a sort of beacon and example to us all, so very keen to push that. The bill coming in really focuses mainly around the definition, and I wonder if you've got any comments of how they seem to be defining in the bill shared education as controlled and maintained and socio-economic and political. Have you got any comment on?
We welcome an all-embracive approach to sharing, but I suppose it would be very important that it wouldn't ignore the particular issue that divides us. I think the issue of religious and class divisions here in Northern Ireland, especially given our context, are critically important, and I think that must be recognised as of particular importance. But we welcome an all-embracive approach that allows schools, preschools from differing sectors to have an opportunity to begin to create shared experiences. We've had a very good example in rural County Fermanagh through the Fermanagh Trust and the Shared Education Programme funded by the International Fund for Ireland, where we've been able to develop a real truly embracing approach to sharing within a rural context, embracing a variety of forms of education providers, but with a strong focus on ensuring that the key issues of identity and religion were fully embraced.
So you're happy with them being sort of specified, whereas it may make people have to be put into boxes when they're not in boxes. I mean, I like and very much take on board the all-embracing, but that would be a concern that runs through.
Yes,
for me.
yes.
Okay. Robin?
Chair, I wasn't expecting you to come to me so soon. So, can I thank you for coming up and your obvious enthusiasm, and your commitment, your passion even for it. And I agree with the Chair in many ways that you have been a beacon. Can I just ask you about, I mean, I know you'd be well used to, with all your own projects and history and so on, about measuring the outcome. I think it's something I'm kind of struggling with at the minute. If you were making suggestions, making proposals to DAE on the shared education, how would you see the, I was going to use value for money, but I'd be a bit wider than that. How would you measure the outcomes of a shared education and say, well, this is delivering for our folk?
I think that's a very, very important question, and I think within the austere environment, austere financial environment, it even makes it more important. But it's also very important in policy terms. As we began our work in terms of really developing a Respecting Difference programme for young children, that very issue right at the very beginning was core to what we were doing. So we began with thinking about the outcomes that we wanted to improve, and we developed those outcomes from the evidence base, evidence conducted by Professor Paul Connolly, which showed in Northern Ireland that importantly children were developing very strong and positive senses of identity, but were also then developing very negative attitudes to others who they were perceived to be different, mainly on religious grounds, but also on race, ethnicity, physical disability, the whole range of differences. So that led us to thinking about the type of outcomes. We then set an outcomes framework that we would work to, where we aim to achieve a situation where all children in Northern Ireland, regardless of their background, could grow up and become inclusive in inclusive communities. And we measured that in terms of their confidence in their own identity, but also their understanding, their respect for others, their willingness to engage with others, their understanding and respect for other traditions and cultures, the removal of fear from other. And we also set indicators and outcomes for teachers and parents. And in the main for teachers, before we commenced our work, the baseline analysis indicated that teachers here had not the confidence, had not had the inputs through their initial and ongoing professional development to adequately address issues of difference and sharing. So it was very important for us to be able to measure the degree of competence and confidence in parents, and then in teachers, and then for parents, also very importantly, opportunities to measure the confidence and willingness of parents to be engaged themselves in activities for sharing, but also to support their own young children. So absolutely, I think setting an agreed outcome framework, it would be critical for this policy.
Just, the Ulster Teachers Union were making the point yesterday about the need for investment in the teachers to deliver. Perhaps not, maybe I took them up wrong, but less positive or less clear on how you get parents to become involved. So on the basis that if the teachers are involved, and the parents aren't involved, or vice versa. I mean, so how do you get the match between how do you encourage the teachers and the parents to be working together? I mean, what's the strategy there that needs to be?
And I think that's a critically important factor. We know from evidence and research that 80% of what children know and understand doesn't actually happen in the school, it happens in the family. So creating a real strategy and a partnership between schools and families is critical. And we have found that a first step is supporting the Board of Management to develop a strategy for parental engagement around this type of work. The programme that we have developed has as an intricate part of the service design a number of parent workshops over the year that happen, if it's a single identity school, with parents first of all in their own identity grouping, but also if it's a shared environment on a shared basis. And it's critical that what's happening in the classroom, identical support is given to parents to support that work in the home environment. And we have found that to be a very successful strategy. And indeed, we have found that parents very much want this opportunity to have a different experience for themselves and for their children than they've had in the past.
And I think what has also been important, particularly in interface areas where we've been working, is this whole idea of clustering schools, preschools, Sure Starts, so that you're really working with children and families from age 2 to 8, and the whole involvement and engagement of parents is deepening throughout that period, and their understanding and confidence around this issue and their willingness to address that is really evolving. That, I think, has proved to be very positive.
Just short, give me just one example of how the school's management team have actually engaged with parents and with a successful outcome.
Okay, so schools approach us, and we'll take the Fermanagh example because I think it is a very good example of sharing. The management boards in the primary schools in Fermanagh first of all agreed that they wanted to embrace this type of approach. The first step is that the management boards have an opportunity for training and reflection and the development of a shared policy within the school. And the management committees, some of whom are parents, will then engage with the parent workshops. And the first element of the parents' workshop is providing parents an opportunity to reflect on their experience of living in a divided society, their experience of being educated separately and what that has meant, and then an introduction to what the curriculum will look for their children in terms of the Respecting Difference curriculum, and then using that as a way to embrace a whole school approach to sharing around other curricular content areas, and then a series of activities, other sort of events for parents to be engaged in outside the school environment. So, as Pauline said, a whole community-based approach to embracing
on a
shared
basis,
shared education.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Robin. Sean.
And it's really the same. You're very welcome, Siobhan and
Thank
Polly.
you,
And I think you put it very well in terms of developing shared education. It's not a matter of giving money to schools and let them get on with it. It's about this capacity building. Could you maybe just give me a wee bit more on how you build capacity within your organisation for sharing education?
Absolutely, Sean, and I think it is a critically important point. I think teachers, preschool teachers, are very willing, but they really do need the support and the strategies. So we have started off by developing a range of training for teachers so that they can implement this curriculum within either preschool or the primary school or further up the system. We've also developed a range of culturally and contextually appropriate resources that support teachers in terms of the delivery of a new curriculum. You might not be surprised, but when we started this work, there was very little in terms of curriculum resources that actually reflects the reality of a Northern Ireland context. There were lots of resources about ethnic minorities from other environments, but not anything reflecting the tensions within Northern Ireland's divided past. We also firmly believe that the curriculum, preschool and primary school curriculum, needs changing to reflect this greater focus on sharing. We also know from both our own practice but also evidence internationally that as much focus and support for teachers needs to be given to the emotional development of children. This issue of respect for their own identity, understanding that, and then growing the emotional intelligence as well as the knowledge intelligence around understanding and respect for other identities and cultures.
I'm going to have to. I need to nip out for 15 minutes, so apologies for having to do that, which means we need to go through a process which the clerk will take us through, and I'll be back in a quarter of an hour.
Thank you, Danny.
Thanks.
Just bear with us for just 2 minutes.
Okay.
So, members, in the absence of the deputy chair, the committee has to elect its own chair. Are there any nominations? Mr. Craig, who would you like to nominate?
Rose Nelson.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
Mr. Lunn, Mr. McCausland, are you willing to? Are there any other nominees? No. In the absence of any other nominees, no need for election. Invite Mr. McCausland to chair the meeting. Democracy in action.
You went for the oldest.
It's Trevor.
Oh, Trevor Lund.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Already rewarded.
Yes, Siobhan, welcome.
Thank you.
Yes, the oldest.
The previous chair, second chair already said it, but I do admire the work you do.
Thank you.
And long may you do it. Yeah, you're heavily into the things, understanding, respect, identity, the Respecting Difference programme, and that's grand. Our inquiry is about shared and integrated. I don't think the word integrated has been mentioned yet this morning. Would you agree with me? Well, there's two things. Do you find it necessary to do much work with integrated schools? And do you not think that an integrated school is actually a perfect example of the type of instruction you would like to see in our schools?
And apologies for not using integrated, because we would, I suppose, use integrated with a small I in terms of the integrated sector. Because again, we believe that everything we do in our organisation within our sector is fully integrated. It was interesting when we began to be more proactive in this type of work in terms of creating shared and inclusive spaces. We assumed that a lot of this work would have been carried out by the integrated education organisation, but they actually came to us for some of the training that we have since developed. So we would have a very positive relationship with the integrated sector. And yes, as a name, we would love to see schools fully integrated in the broadest sense. But I suppose we've had to deal with the reality of the Northern Ireland situation, where our latest estimate was that only 5% of children are actually formally educated in the integrated sector. So we had to make sure that our approaches were reflective of where both children were in the informal preschool environment and where they would be when they entered the formal system.
It's actually 7%, but we're not.
7 now.
Not slightly over. Fair enough. The department, when they talk to us about the shared education programme, their emphasis is unashamedly on educational attainment. And if you forget about trying to define it, shared education has been going on long before the term shared education ever was invented. It's been a necessity. It's been an invaluable thing, I think, down the years in a quiet way, and Fermanagh is perhaps the best example we have. So I don't think there's any conflict between what you're trying to do and what the department's trying to do, but there's a different emphasis.
Yeah, and I would worry that the department would focus just on a narrow focus on narrow cognitive educational gains, when we know that, especially within the context of a divided society, young children and young people have to also have outcomes that reflect their ability to be citizens in an inclusive society. And unfortunately, we know from all of the evidence, and there is increasing evidence, that young people are growing up with attitudes, prejudicial attitudes, formed when they're between 3 and 6. We have the evidence, and if not addressed, if only the educational focus on outcomes is addressed, if the other issues of inclusion, respect, citizenship is not addressed, we will continue to have some of the problems that we have.
Yes, but those aspects are more likely to be addressed in a school where there are pupils from all sides of the community. I'm deliberately not saying an integrated school, but it's more likely to be addressed in a mixed school, an amalgamated school. It happens perhaps more at secondary level. Obviously, in the grammar schools are quite well mixed, integrated these days.
One would assume that,
yeah.
But unless there are intentional strategies around this issue, and indeed a move away from neutralising the environment to recognising and celebrating and respecting the environments that children come from.
I don't think you're saying that integrated schools actually neutralise the environment.
No,
they confront the situation head on.
But in other environments, it can be ignored.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
That was an interesting exchange from the oldest member of the committee. Just thought it sad since he was having a go at me.
I'm not a good yet. That's never too
I wanted to pick up on the issue there's on page, I'm not quite sure what the page number is, but paragraph 327 in your paper. There's an important thing there. You say it's vital, therefore, that children's identity is validated in the school or preschool setting, which I agree with absolutely, and I think you've set out already this morning the important role that has. And also in the next paragraph, you talk about the dangers, the pitfalls around colour blindness and tokenism as they're set out there. How would you say, what are the examples of good practice or examples of how it can and should be done in terms of validating in the school the children's identity?
I'll give you a couple of examples, and I suppose, again, it's because we've taken this very sort of intentional, integrated approach to the development of what we're doing. But using curriculum resources in particular, and particularly both with young children but also primary school children, using the development of persona dolls, which have been developed by the local context. So personas representing the Protestant loyalist community, the Catholic national community, traveller children, children with disability, ethnic minority children. That's one example and helping children from across the various identity identify with those persona and also understand and develop respect for the other persona. But also we've taken a very intentional and sensitive approach to many of the cultural and sporting symbols that divide us in Northern Ireland. And when we started our work, we were really surprised that there were very few resources for children in classrooms celebrating the Orange 12th of July March, St Patrick's Day, celebrating Gaelic games or other games, celebrating Irish dancing, Scotch dancing. So introducing all of those traditions in a developmentally appropriate way, we have found has been very important in terms of growing and continuing to grow a confidence in one's own identity and beliefs, while at the same time growing the confidence and respect for others. And the outworkings of that in many of our settings implementing has been then parents being able to celebrate other traditional events with children and families of different communities within a community context, and that we feel is very positive.
I was interested in the phrase that you used at one point, that saying that very young children develop a strong sense of identity. And I suppose what was in my mind then was how and where you learn about that identity can shape the child's appreciation of the identity. So to be Irish, to be British, to be whatever, will be influenced by how that is transmitted, because different children, different backgrounds, different experiences will have different understandings of each of those. Would that suggest that there is importance then that these things are explored in schools and in early years, so that children get an authentic, accurate, comprehensive experience and understanding of what the identity is, and it's not a very, maybe sometimes sharp-edged,
absolutely
abrasive?
Absolutely. And we began this work in 2001, after the end of after the Good Friday Agreement, when I think a lot of people were thinking this generation of children, 3 to 6, would not have been affected by the past. But when we looked at even the external, murals, flags, etc., and the voices from adults, parents, others, that these young children are constantly influenced by, it isn't any wonder that positive identity is skewed one way or the other, and then unfortunately leads to negative attitudes and beliefs to others. So for us it is extremely important, and we've also found with adults, teachers and parents, that they have an emotional dislike or perception of the other, but when examined, often that was based on a total lack of understanding, and that's what part of some of the experiential elements of the training. Some teachers, parents were saying, we don't like the green Hibernian marches, but they didn't understand what they were about, and vice versa for the 12th of July marches. So, a real approach to deconstructing history, culture, identity before you can reconstruct in a very positive way is critically important.
And in that area, the teachers that you come across and talk to about this, how do they come with their own perceptions about the other culture, and maybe even about the culture of the community from which they come themselves?
Absolutely. You know, I think we're all products of both our past, our history. So it is one of the first things that we do is helping teachers in a very experiential, positive, safe way explore what their understanding of the other is. And it's very interesting when you do that and get a teacher to think about, write 10 very positive things about a traveller family. And when they see what that looks like, you know, that begins to help them reflect on, well, where did I get those beliefs? Likewise, 10 positive things about the Catholic community. So that's the starting point for us. But we found that teachers are very, very willing, want the support to develop the strategies and the curriculum to create shared environments.
Okay, thank you. Robin?
As I think Trevor actually covered it, Chair, so I think I'll forgo my question.
Oh, sorry, I was reading notes there. Okay, everyone content with the... Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Thank
Paula
you.
and Pauline, and we appreciate your presentation there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chairman, point of order.
Yes, you can.
I've been conducting a straw poll. I'm not the oldest member.
Just like the oldest. That's not an answer to hope.
Who was involved in your straw poll?
The obvious.
Well, it's obviously the two people
Not too far away.
Let's put the same table anyhow. I just wanted to correct Mr. Craig, that was all. Okay, we've had the presentation there. Are there any actions you want to take on the basis of that, or do we simply note it at this stage?
I just, Chair, do they only receive funding from education, or is there other? I mean, do OFM, DFM fund any of their activities?
Yeah, Chair, if members look at my little note, I think I've indicated hopefully I've indicated where they get their money from. They get money from DHS, SPS, Atlantic Philanthropy, BCS. They have quite a large number of funders, and it's quite a large number of staff as well. It's about 50 practitioners based in, 8 centres across Northern Ireland providing these various services. Right. So DE is actually quite a small player. There would be DHS, SPS, I think OFM, DFM, Atlantic Philanthropy, etc.
But I mean, from those sources which suggest that they're all project funding or at least time-bound funding?
Yeah, I think in my note it indicates that 12% of their funding is unrestricted, which means they do as they please with it. And I think the money was, 8 million is their total budget, so 12% of that, so a good million or so, well, nearly a million, would be for them to invest as they see appropriate.
Right. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The next presentation is an oral briefing then from the Youth Council for Northern Ireland, and I would refer members to the clerk's cover note at page 415, and then there's a submission to the inquiry from the Youth Council itself. So if we're content to see the presentation.
Page 1, 2, 3, I don't know what I was thinking of.
Oh, page 1, 2, 3, yes, I
sorry. What were we thinking of?
And I welcome to the meeting David Guilfoyle, the Chief Executive, Norma Ray, the Development Officer, deals with equality principles, and Joanne Stainsby, who's the Project Officer, and invite the representatives from the Youth Council to make the presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. On behalf of the Youth Council, I'd like to welcome the opportunity to speak to the committee today. You've already had the introductions of my two colleagues, so I'll not refrain from repeating that. I'm confident that we will be the only organisation presenting to this committee whose focus is the Northern Ireland Youth Service. So we believe it's important that whenever we comment on shared education, integrated education, we'll do it through Youth Service lens, so that will be a key focus of our input today. The Youth Service is often a forgotten member of the education sector family, and yet it engages on a regular basis with 150,000 young people annually. It's also recognised, indeed the Minister has recognised this, that 70% of young persons learning takes place outside the school. So it's evident, therefore, that the youth service is a key player impacting on that 70%. Youth work, we all believe, is a very important part of education. Indeed, the Minister flagged this up in his key policy document, Priorities for Youth. He said youth work has an important contribution to make to the development of young people within the context of the education service, contributor to educational and lifelong learning outcomes. Indeed, in the Priorities for Youth policy, he goes on to say that we have a very important role to play in building a new society, shared society. We equip young people with the skills, attitudes and behaviours which they need, and these in turn work towards addressing the legacy of conflict and move towards a shared, inclusive society. Youth Council, I know you've heard a little bit about this morning, was established in 1990 with statutory functions including advising the Department on development of youth service and also encouraging and developing community relations work. And over a number of years, we've been involved in coordinating a wide range of initiatives on behalf of the sector, and many of these initiatives by the sector have been recognised by as a result of their contribution to a shared and peaceful society. I know you're also aware of the fact that Youth Council provides core funding to around 40 regional voluntary youth organisations. They provide crucial support to frontline youth work, and indeed they work with 112,000 young people. In fact, that's about 75% of the total number of young people involved in youth groups. However, I think it would be pertinent for me to point out that the majority of Youth Council staff are not involved in the administration of such funding. The majority of Youth Council staff are involved in discharging Youth Council statutory responsibilities in areas such as training, international North-South work and community relations. Since we submitted our initial response to the committee, there have been 4 very significant developments which we want to flag up today. The first was the draft policy on shared education. The second was the draft shared education bill. The third was the Education Training Inspectorate evaluation of credit policy in schools and youth organisations. And finally, the Minister's announcement in his draft D budget to end all credit funding. So our presentation today will concentrate on these. I want to touch these 4 items very briefly, first of all, Chair. First of all, the policy on shared education. This evolved from the Ministerial Advisory Group. That was written at a time when we all envisaged an Education Skills Authority being formed, which have subsumed Youth Council functions. The new Education Authority obviously is a new animal, so we wait to see how that will be taken on board in terms of Youth Council's current functions. There is also a need for the key actions on the shared education to be developed in consultation with our sector, and we believe we have a major role to play in assisting our sector comment on those. The second point, Chair, was the issue of the shared bill. And we recognise the inclusion of youth work in the bill and the recognition of the role youth work can play in encouraging shared education. We note that we are cited as Youth Council in the bill with the power that we may encourage and facilitate shared education, but we will contrast that with our existing statutory functions, which actually require us to address the issue of community relations work in society. So, in actual fact, our current statutory functions are weaker than that which is actually included in the draft bill. Thirdly, Chair, I want to touch on the issue of the Education Training Inspectorate. Their policy review came out last week, and it was very timely because it noted, amongst other things, that voluntary youth organisations need support to expand and embed CRED through the dissemination of good practice events, training and increased access for young people to programmes. And these young people, in fact, react very favourably to the safe places which these organisations are able to provide for them. The report also went on to commend the Youth Council setting up a credit reference group comprising organisations we fund who support us in these roles, and also went on to commend the Youth Council in providing appropriate support and guidance to challenge youth voluntary organisations to develop CRED and embed CRED within their own organisations. If I step aside briefly, Chair, to say in our initial response, we noted that shared education must not diminish the valuable role and place of CRED. In actual fact, shared education is actually something we see living within a CRED umbrella. The fourth point, Chair, is that the announcement of the Minister made before Christmas to remove the entire CRED budget, followed by his announcement for funding and shared education, we believe that the removal of the CRED budget poses a very major threat to youth work moving forward. So in summary, Chair, what we will attempt to do this morning is to highlight several key points. The first of all is there needs to be clarity on the role and place of the youth service and indeed the future role of Youth Council in all these matters. And secondly, to remove the CRED budget in light of shared education is to seriously erode the valuable contribution which Youth Work has to make in this area and will jeopardise the legacy of the valuable work supported by CRED over the last few years. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to hand over to my colleague now, Norma Ray.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone for the opportunity to speak today. I'm just going to take a moment to look over the proposed policy from a youth work lens. It's good that it's out before we came here today, as I say, we feel very important points to make in relation to youth work in general in terms of that policy. Youth Council very much welcome the Minister's reference to the long history of community relations work in youth work organisations in his foreword. However, although he goes on to make specific reference to teachers benefiting from improved professional development, senior leaders and governors working more closely together and collaboration becoming a vehicle for school improvement, he makes no reference to a vision for youth work. The introduction to the shared education policy states that it is intended that all children and young people should have an opportunity to be involved. And it notes that the policy is aimed at early years schools and non-formal education environments such as youth work. And we very much welcome that clarity. However, the policy goes on to state that in order to reflect the full educational commitment of DE, within available funding, schools and other educational environments will receive resources, acknowledgement, support and encouragement to start or continue to develop high-quality shared education opportunities for their pupils. And this is an example of the confusing nature of the policy. If it is about the full educational commitment of DE, then references to pupils throughout the policy must be reviewed to ensure that they're not being applied at the exclusion of work of other educational environments. And in many cases, and including the example above, these need to be replaced with the term children and young people. We very much welcome the vision for the shared education policy for vibrant, self-improving shared education partnerships, and in particular the reference to promoting equality of opportunity, good relations, equality of identity and respect for diversity and community cohesion. We believe strongly that this vision is strengthened when it's placed within the existing Department of Education CRED policy, and very much endorse the Department of Education position presented here on the 21st of January, that shared education forms part of the CRED policy. The CRED policy is broader. It goes beyond a focus on shared education partnerships to mandate all schools and youth organisations to contribute to improving relations between communities. And it states that this is about educating children and young people to develop self-respect, respect for others, promote equality, work to eliminate discrimination, and by providing formal and non-formal education opportunities for them to build relationships with those from different backgrounds and traditions. When applied correctly, it does and should deliver whole organisational approaches to this challenging task. And as Alan Smith recently noted, one of the concerns of shared education is that the Department's own plan suggests that even after 4 years, only 65% of schools will actually be eligible to receive funding under shared education. Turning back to the shared education policy, its background makes no reference to the fundamental role played by youth work in this area since the 1980s. This is despite the Department's own review of community relations, which was completed between 2009 and 2010, having found that work already completed in the youth sector is further ahead than that available for the teaching profession, and the contribution of youth service having been recognised in the resulting CRED policy. Specifically, the CRED policy made reference to the work of the JEDI initiative, and I should state that that was a strategic initiative funded by IFI, which brought together the lead voluntary and statutory youth work agencies across the youth service to develop coherent approaches to practice, training and policies in this field, and the work resulting from it also informed the CRED training, which I'll refer to later. As I said, the policy made reference to the work of the JEDI initiative, stating that within the youth service, the JEDI initiative has developed a range of training programmes, support resources and practice models. This work has been recognised as good practice, and in particular its ability to address the needs of those more marginalised young people. This is a model that could usefully be built upon, and that was stated just simply 4 years ago. The contribution of youth service to this field has been further endorsed by the recent publication of the Education and Training Inspectorate's evaluation of CRED. David has already made reference to its recommendation on the need to expand and embed CRED, its endorsement of the safe space that youth organisations provide for young people to develop confidence around issues of diversity and inclusion, and the appropriate support and challenge role that YCNI provides in the development of this practice. But the ETI evaluation report went further than that. It noted that children and young people respond well to strategies which welcome and celebrate their uniqueness and their diversity within youth organisations. In the most effective practice, children and young people demonstrate high levels of self-respect and respect for others. It also notes that there are too many missed opportunities for schools and youth organisations to work together to promote better learning for young people. Of the schools and youth organisations currently engaged in CRED work, the ETI report noted that most demonstrated effective CRED practice in helping children and young people build relationships with others from different backgrounds and traditions. Yet the shared education policy only briefly mentions the arrival of the DE CRED policy in 2011 and makes no consideration of the work it has brought forward across the educational settings. This significant oversight puts existing models of good practice at risk, with the potential to damage work which has been building up a commitment to this agenda, relationship building and sharing, across voluntary sector youth groups and the local communities in which they operate. The background to the shared education policy does note concerns as to whether the educational and social needs of young people are being met, and it makes reference to a number of groups, including those living with disabilities and those who currently who may identify as GLBT. As part of our commitment to the CRED agenda, Youth Council funds the Hub, which is a consortium arrangement which brings together all the disability-focused youth organisations across the spectrum of disability to promote the inclusion of young people with disabilities across youth service. Work of this nature needs to be recognised within the shared education policy and linked to a clear vision on how it will be taken alongside actions for shared education, either as part of the shared education policy or under the CRED policy. There are a number of other oversights within the policy. The case for shared education makes reference to a body of research regarding the effectiveness of school collaboration, but makes no attempt to consider the case for collaboration across youth service groups or units. The section outlining the current and future context of shared education makes no reference to the Department of Education's CRED policy, the Department's policy for youth document, or the youth service curriculum. The policy section does note that shared education involves schools and other education providers, which we very much welcome, and goes on to record an expectation that will be organised and delivered to promote equality of opportunity and social inclusion for children at school and in less formal education, which again Youth Council welcomes. However, it makes no attempt to elaborate on how the Department will take account of the particular needs of youth service. There is reference to a wide range and variety of opportunities for shared education, including adequate training for teachers, support staff and youth workers. Yet there is no key actions to support funding for youth worker training. With the Minister's intention to remove the CRED budget, this matter is critical. At this point, it's important to note that the voluntary youth sector makes up over 90% of our youth service. Annually, over 22,000 volunteers contribute to this work. The young people who participate in these groups, the volunteers who support them, and the communities they represent all have a role to play in delivering success in the shared education and related TPOC agendas. Linked to this point, the CRED Reference Group has recently developed comprehensive CRED training for those working with young people. This is accredited training available in the Qualifications and Credit Framework, if you're familiar with that. And this training has much to offer those wishing to take forward both the shared education and summer camps initiatives within TPOC. It's about supporting those to engage young people in this work. But again, the removal of the CRED budget it puts this at serious risk. The core principles for the delivery of shared education, the policy aim and the objectives need to be amended to be inclusive with youth service and the bodies that support this work. And this is related to David's earlier point when recommendations for ESA and the Ministerial Advisory Group's research, which informed this policy, do not automatically read across to the Education Authority, and this context needs to be reflected and considered within the policy. The intended outcomes for the shared education and policy include increased opportunity for young people to learn in a shared environment, both formal and non-formal, and increasing the number of children and young people participating in high-quality shared education programmes. This outcome will be strengthened when placed within the CRED policy. However, this further highlights David's earlier recommendations on the need for clarity in the role of youth service within shared education. Key actions to be developed for shared education in consultation with the representative bodies, including YCNI, which reflect the specific needs of youth work, and for shared education's relationship to the CRED policy to be clearly stated. The current proposal to remove the CRED budget will seriously marginalise the capacity of voluntary sector youth work organisations to deliver this shared education outcome within existing and very stretched budgets. I just want to take just a moment to really just specifically outline the work that will be lost as a result of the CRED budget being removed for regional voluntary youth organisations. It was a budget of 152,000 and, for example, during 2012-2013 it would have impacted on up to 20 organisations. You've got regional organisations who then impact on local organisations, the volunteers within them and the young people. Over 500 young people and volunteers were supported to a level where they would be taking forward CRED work in their own local settings. So we're not just talking about young people engaging in CRED-based activities, it's capacity building and the need to build that capacity. And the multiplier impact of this is difficult to calculate, but if these young people and volunteers influence just 5 others, the investment costs about £60 per person. The following year, 2012-2013, we would have 2 streams: strategic investment organisations working in partnership, looking at whole organisational approaches to embedding this work, and then organisations themselves might pick up on extra activity that they would need to then further embed this work within their organisation. So the following year, one of those organisations picked up on our short-term funding of £2,500, and they developed learning opportunities on the CRED themes, which then impacted in that year, and they will still exist within that organisation, but in that year on 360 young people and 185 volunteers. In addition, the CRED budget has contributed to approximately 8 staff members, not full-time posts, but who play a crucial support role across the funded and support groups. So this is what we would regard as a very skeleton infrastructure of skills and expertise across voluntary, church, rural, community and the uniform-based youth work settings. But it provides an essential mechanism to support and enhance this work and take it forward and take it to the volunteers. There is significant investment expected to take forward the shared education agenda across schools. However, there is no alternative investment proposed for youth services. I'm going to pass to my colleague Joanne, who will give you a flavour of some of the feedback that we would have got from young people and volunteers who have taken part in some of that work.
So, firstly, I would also like to extend my thanks to committee members for the invitation to be here today. I would like to use the opportunity to give you a flavour of the impact that the CRED funding distributed by YCNI has had on youth organisations, volunteers and on young people, and share with you some of what they have said. CRED funding issued by YCNI is currently supporting a number of strategic partnership arrangements to undertake agreed programmes of work to enhance the capacity of youth work activities across 4 different youth work settings: the uniformed, rural, church and community voluntary, in order to help deepen the experience for young people and improve understanding of the CRED policy and its themes across the wider youth work sector. The uniformed CRED partnership includes 6 organisations: the Boys Brigade, the Catholic Guides of Ireland, the Girls Brigade, Girl Guiding Ulster, the Scout Association and Scouting Ireland. And collectively, the uniformed sector in Northern Ireland works with in excess of 55,000 young people and 12,000 volunteers. At a recent CRED sharing event in early December 2014, a uniformed consortium member highlighted that this investment in CRED and developing these collaborative approaches has resulted in all of those 6 organisations involved in this partnership embarking on a journey together that simply would not have happened without it. and as another uniformed organisation stated, the investment was relatively small per organisation, but the impact has been vast. The learning from the Uniformed Sector Partnership has resulted in a range of new training being developed across all of the organisations for volunteers and young people, and is being embedded into its existing voluntary sector youth service infrastructure. But, as the partnership also reiterated, this work is still in its infancy. Across all of the 4 partnerships and other YCNI CRED projects, the inclusion of marginalised young people is at the core of the work. This includes work to promote the inclusion of young people with disabilities, young people who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual or transgender, and other Section 75 groups, further addressing educational underachievement and contributing to raising educational standards for all. This work continues to engage with young people who often have limited opportunities to engage or meet with others from communities outside of their own. One young person, whom has recently engaged in a CRED project for the first time, said this: "I was the victim of a sectarian attack not so long ago. After that happening, it would be very easy for me to feel bitter, angry, hateful. Community relations, however, is important to me and to my community. We need opportunities to engage across the divide." Another young person said, "In the beginning, there were some issues to do with sectarianism within the group. We all come from areas where sectarianism is a problem. It's easy to get caught up in all of that. However, this project is giving us the chance to talk, and we will continue to talk some more. And this has really helped me to understand things a bit more." A young person from the Uniform Partnership shared that an important learning outcome for them has been visiting the peace lines in Belfast. "I have never visited them before, but regularly I have heard about them. This was a great opportunity to learn about why they are there in the first place and to gain more insight from a range of different perspectives about the country that we are living in now." This work, however, does not only support young people to participate in CRED projects, but also to take on leadership roles and share their learning with others, for example, by co-facilitating discussions with peers. In November 2014, one young person reflected on their feelings about being a peer leader and discussing CRED themes with other young people. "At the start of the CRED project, I felt slightly uneasy about being a peer leader because, well, I wasn't sure how others would react." Another young person added to this, however, that "I want to do youth work. I want to help other young people to discuss cross-community and diversity issues. I want to represent my community in a way that no one has seen before, so that in time, people will look at me and see me as someone they are proud of. I want to provide something for young people coming behind me that I didn't have when I was growing up." As a youth worker recently expressed, "If we are asking our young people to be brave and to lead the way, it is important that we get behind them and adequately support and resource them to do so. Otherwise, what message are we sending out?" YCNI staff have also been involved in developing a number of practical training resources that have involved collaborating and sharing with other sectors. For example, providing space for teachers and for youth workers, or for outdoors instructors and youth workers to come together and to explore CRED themes. The Incredible Drama Toolkit training is one such example. A teacher who participated on this training concluded that "I have been given many fresh and new ideas and fresh strategies to help me to explore citizenship themes with young people in the classroom." And another stated that the training has highlighted the potential of using these tools and techniques to raise awareness and look at social issues relevant to the community in my classroom. Often in schools, we are focused on the end product, However, this training has reminded me of the importance of the process or the journey that a young person is on and the links that this can have with other areas. At the Cred sharing event in December, youth organisations wanted to reiterate this, that without this seed funding, we are now concerned about what will happen to this work and how it will impact on our ability to deliver, thus decreasing the educational opportunities for many young people from a diverse range of communities, backgrounds and circumstances. Youth Council echoes this concern.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, and apologies for not being here at the beginning, and Nelson, thank you for chairing it. I don't think any of us doubt the massive work that you do and the space. I think when the priorities for youth was in front of the committee, or was it 18 months ago, to suddenly realise the sheer scale of what you're influencing, and I think to hear about the importance of Cred, certainly I agree with that, and we've as a committee got to find a way to make sure we don't lose what was learned, or the other side would then try and help you. So very much take those points on board. The bill, which is really what we're focusing on here, the definition is what all the debates are going to be about, and I'm intrigued because you mentioned celebrating uniqueness and differences, which is very much important. I've always been intrigued by this balance between teaching someone who they are and making sure that they're proud of it, and then respecting someone else for the same. Balancing that against blurring the passion that can go with your identity. When we get to the definition, my concern is that by defining maintained and controlled socioeconomic or political differences, we actually will force people into having to choose which they are. And I just wonder how you feel. It's that fine balance in the middle.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. It's a very difficult one, and for me, that's where, in my experience, I would go back to the debates that we were very much part of in the development of the Cred policy, which was about maintaining that tension between your uniqueness and your identity and its place within a diverse society, and the respect for others if you are to receive respect for that identity too, which is very much underpins the learning and the training that we would support teachers and youth workers really, and primarily to deliver on, and the messages for that. I think if you start to get into defining who's in and who's not, and as opposed to focusing on the outcomes, that becomes confusing, because the outcomes for me are around the respect for each other, and then you're not about excluding people as to who's in that. And if this is also relating back to TBUC, reconciliation agendas and peace-building agendas must be there too. So focusing on the outcome can sometimes help to keep the path clear.
So you think we should have a slightly broader definition than 3 tighter definitions?
I think the emphasis needs to be on the outcome.
Right, okay, there we go.
And I do think that in some way the Cred policy reflects that, and it's an aim, that the outcome is there. And then you're not excluding groups as to who's in to achieve that outcome, but it's about demonstrating that the work is going to achieve that outcome.
But I mean, something I very much got from you today, other than obviously your passion and what you do, is that Cred really is what should be leading shared education. And therefore all the work you've done, I know from one group we've been talking to, they felt that the integrated sector should also be heavily involved because they've learned so much, and maybe those are the 2 things we've got to take forward, is what's learned from both.
Yeah, I mean, I very much think that if the Department of Education's commitment to this agenda becomes only this shared education as it sits at the moment, it's very narrow. And that therefore is quite risky in terms of the outcomes that really it should be contributing towards. That's not to take away from necessarily the proposals, but yes, it can't. You can't do this in isolation.
Understood. Okay. Trevor.
Well, thanks for your presentation. If I had questions, you've really answered them, and quite a good but lengthy presentation there. I do admire what you do. I suppose to say this to all the groups, but really do mean it in your case. And I'm interested in what you're saying about the uniformed organisations that you work with. That wee badge is historical, but it's Boys Brigade. Where do you stand on this what appears to be a slight conflict between the department and various organisations about where the emphasis should be in terms of shared education? The department makes the point that it's basically about educational outcomes. I gather from you that you'd see the other types of outcomes as being at least equally or perhaps more important.
Perhaps if I pick that point up, within the youth service, we're very much aware that what department funds must be framed within educational outcomes. Indeed, we are very proud of the fact youth service is part of the youth education family. And what we do is complementary to what happens in school. Indeed, a number of us up here have actually direct links or indirect links with schools. And I used to be a teacher myself, so I appreciate what happens in the classroom, but also recognise the things that happen outside the classroom can't happen in the classroom, so we can work together. So we do see what we do as educational outcomes, and what we've done recently through a project which involves our colleagues in both the strategy and voluntary sector, we're looking at how we can map youth work outcomes across to educational outcomes. We feel it's a very easy fit. And in fact, youth work outcomes certainly help educational outcomes for young people. We've recently come up with a framework for this. We've come up with, we've identified 6 different areas of capabilities. Areas such as enhanced person capabilities, improved health and well-being, developing thinking skills, work and life skills, developing positive relationships, increased participation, active citizenship. Now, those are all relevant to the classroom. They're also relevant to youth service. Indeed, in youth service, we've got the opportunities to perhaps do things which they say you can't do in the classroom. You can teach citizenship. Youth service can practice active citizenship. We can provide opportunities for young people to work with others from diverse backgrounds in settings which is voluntary of their choice. So certainly it seems to us that there's no contradiction, no conflict here. We are educational outcomes, youth work outcomes map with that, but in terms of the work we do within the CRED, we actually can specialise in some aspects of. Perhaps my colleague Norman might want to pick that up.
Oh, no,
You're happy with that? Happy with that? Okay.
You do directly or indirectly finance youth club activity. Is that cross-community or mostly cross-community?
Well, the youth are going back the last number of decades, and I'm personally involved as youth worker as a volunteer way back in the 70s. Youth service has always sought to work with young people from all communities, and certainly we've become more sophisticated with that as years have gone on. But the youth service is something which is based in the community, and certainly that allows us to make good links with all sectors of the community. It is very challenging. And certainly, as I say, we've had to make sure we train people, we equip them to be able to cope with that. We as Youth Council don't fund local groups on the ground, but very importantly, I think you've already heard this morning, we fund 40 regional voluntary youth organisations whose support to the local groups is crucial. So in terms of the Boys Brigade, and I say this as a former member and officer in the Boys Brigade, the Boys Brigade relied very much on its headquarter body, who recently had inspection carried out by the Inspectorate. I don't think I've read the output yet, but no doubt it was a very positive one. And certainly the BB would be very supportive of all their companies across Northern Ireland, ensuring that not just the badge work, the NCO training and all their work is carried out to the highest standards. If that support wasn't there, then the work on the ground would suffer and the young people's education outcomes would suffer in turn.
I think it's also just fair to say that youth service will be, because it's rooted in community, will be a reflection of the community that we have, and so it will be prone to be in some areas more representative of one community than the other, but that's why we would be very proud of the community relations work that has been carried out within that. Within those settings, you also have parents who are volunteering, and so you're needing to bring community with you, and wider representative organisation.
Okay. Which BB company were you in?
22nd Woodville.
73rd Finicky.
I'm sure we're better news to drill anyway.
We're talking military stuff here now. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Robin.
I'm content. Sure.
You're content, are you? Okay, Maeve.
Yeah, just, I mean, I think the issue around the definition is critical, but I think you've answered that. But in your your paper, you talked about almost this sense of support for an arm's length body around peace building. You know, could you maybe elaborate on that?
I think that was looking at the wider TPUC agenda coming down through government and feeling that there would still be a place for challenge back to coordination and for that work, but also then where does the challenge role come back to government? So that was really what we were thinking around, that where do we all have that opportunity for a critical friend to feedback and respond to decisions.
But I suppose that the challenge in that would be almost an additional tier of bureaucracy at a time, I suppose, when we're having just had the previous discussion around frontline and the protection of frontline and the need to be very focused in terms of target and social need.
Now,
have the
council, arm's length wouldn't
the
be
council
us.
explored what that model would be in relation to impact or cost?
I just would be familiar with the benefits that we have seen of having that, even, for example, back to us in terms of the work that we would be doing, and being able to monitor that. CRC do have their own monitoring at the moment, and they play that role very well, and we would rely on a lot of their research to help inform where we should be going, and have done over the past. So just where does that then lie within the future arrangements? I think it's a very important function, and it's the placing of that, which would be very, very...
So it's more about a challenge function, but it's not, in your views, I suppose, detailed?
No.
In relation to cost? Or
No.
If I maybe just come in that too, obviously I think your question interpreted in a number of different ways, but certainly over the years the youth service in Northern Ireland is very much it's a mix of voluntary and statutory. As my colleague Norman said, voluntary is by far the biggest provider. Statutory also plays a big role as well. Since 1990, and I've been there right from the outset when Youth Council was formed, Youth Council was formed with a number of specific functions in mind. And one of the statutory functions we had was to assist the coordination of the efficient resource of the service. And we've interpreted that as actually trying to get all the players together to make more efficient use of what money is on the table and to bring forward various initiatives. And certainly if you've seen any of our stories of our 20, 30 year, 20, 25-year history, there are many examples of initiatives which we have facilitated, not our initiative, but initiatives which have brought together all the sector and have produced real products, real impact on the ground. The challenge for the future is who is going to provide that particular coordinating function, because certainly the voluntary sector needs to work with the statutory sector. The statutory sector needs the voluntary sector to deliver primarily. That's going to be coordinated. So there is an important coordinating function, which I don't personally interpret as administration. I interpret something which is developmental and brings about good impact on the ground.
Is that not something that comes within the remit of the New Education Authority?
Well, as I understand, the Education Authority was meant to subsume the functions of 5 Education Eye Boards. I've read nothing contrary to that to date. The Education Eye Boards, and I can speak with some background in that, as I used to be head of service in the Southern Education Eye Board, is responsible for funding local youth groups and indeed trying to facilitate and support good work in the board area. So that's very much a role that obviously the Education Authority would take on board for Northern Ireland as a whole. What obviously we need to have a conversation about is how other aspects of what's essential for good delivery are actually managed in a way which obviously works within existing resources, because obviously everything is resource capped. But how do we work out the best division of labour between the statutory sector, Education Authority, Youth Council and the voluntary sector, who are the key deliverers in all this?
Okay. Thank you both for that.
Thank you. Nelson.
Yeah. Thanks for the presentation. I thought it was interesting that was mentioned there, if I got it right, 6 uniformed organisations ranging from the Girls' Brigade to the Catholic Guides and everything in between, and 55,000 young people, 12,000 volunteers. And that is a very, very big sector. And it's important that the needs of that sector are not overlooked as we move forward. Could I pose 2 questions? One was the question around shared education. Currently, references religious belief and political affiliation. But the other element in our society is around cultural distinctiveness. And that's been identified even by CNG in terms of the cultural dimension of the Irish medium sector. How do you think that there's merit in broadening that out to include not merely religious belief and political affiliation, but also cultural identity?
Sorry to go back to the CRED one, but I found the different backgrounds and traditions worked quite well for us. And I do think that whenever this policy is going forward, to reiterate what I've said, you can't have in and out. It's about the end game and the outcomes of that. And those who need to be, once you start to find who's going to be in there and not, I think it's going to be quite difficult, and it's quite complex. Just to reiterate that.
And I've no difficulty at all, because the point you made earlier around equity, diversity and interdependence is, to me, the fundamental of the whole thing. It's a three-legged stool, and it takes 3 legs to hold it up. You need all of them to be there. A two-legged stool doesn't stand up. It's that combination that it recognises difference on a basis of equality, but also the interdependence, good relations, community relations, however you describe it. That's hugely important and needs to be acknowledged, because otherwise I think you could have a situation moving forward that would be dysfunctional. Could I just ask one other question? And it's a pity in some ways we didn't have this sequencing this morning in a slightly different order. But on the paper we got there from Peter McCallion, he mentions there about budgets. Your budget that says here in 2013-14 was nearly £6 million. Staff costs 700,000, 5 million from the department, 1 million from whatever other source. Half the spending on regional voluntary organisations, infrastructure funding, and 200,000 then on CRED policy activities. How much of your budget would be from the department would be pure administration, as opposed to developmental work, support, whatever?
If I pick up, I think the figure, as I understand, is 5.1 million, around 6 million, and off that the council distributes 4.9 million. The answer to the question is that obviously the bulk of the funding, vast bulk of the funding received is from the department. We do try and draw down European funding as well. Indeed, actually help many other youth organisations to draw down probably about £500,000 a year in European funding. That's another story. But in terms of the funding the council receives, the council has then discretion as an arm's length body to decide how best to split that up consistent with our statutory functions. So the council has always historically put the vast bulk of that in the hands of voluntary organisations in a variety of different funding schemes. The £900,000, which seems to be coming back, held back in the council, is certainly not administration budget. I've had this argument with the department for decades now. Administration, to my mind, is when someone's actually passing a piece of paper across the table and actually not engaging with the youth organisation receiving that funding, but it's basically a paper passer. And certainly there's a certain percentage of our staff time spent in that. We do administer funding. We're accountable for that funding, so there has to be a certain amount of paper associated with that. But the vast majority of our staff time, myself included, is spent engaging with the sector, engaging with those outside the sector who may be good allies for the sector, which could be another government department such as DSD, DHSS, DOJ, etc. and DEL. Also advising others on how best to utilise the expertise of youth service as they take forward initiatives such as United Youth Programme, T-Buck summer camps, etc. So I would challenge the department to demonstrate how much of £800,000 is actual administration. I'm very happy to sit down and have a discussion to show exactly where staff time goes. The department have our business plan, they know what our staff do, so within our business plan I would thought it's quite obvious too the majority of our staff are not pen pushers but actually doing developmental work, supporting those on the ground, but doing work which actually is moving forward the sector. We're doing work in areas such as North-South contact, international work I've referred to obviously as well, and training. We're developing, as Norma said, accredited training in terms of CRED work. We're developing CRED training in terms of youth work, developing youth work apprenticeships, liaising with DEL. So there's a lot of work goes on which I would not have said personally could be construed as administration.
Maybe helpful to inform our correspondence with the department?
We've made a note of that. I think that's exactly what we should be doing.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you very much. Sean.
No, I'm okay.
Are you okay? Chris?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for your presentation. I think the vast majority of my questions here have actually been answered, but just to pick up actually on a couple of points that Nelson was talking about, you would contradict obviously the Minister's assertion and the Department's assertion this morning then that £800,000 is spent on administration. How much do you say you spend on administration?
Well, as I say, I would like to give a specific figure because it depends what one's counting. Certainly, what we have become aware, and I say I've been Chief Executive for almost 25 years now, the level of public accountability has greatly extended over the years. And obviously, we see no problem with that. Obviously, we've got to abide by that. We've no problem doing so. But certainly, there is a lot of money, time and effort taken by staff looking at how we give out the funding. In fact, we've just had an internal audit report carried out. We'll have our external auditors, PricewaterhouseCoopers, in a few months' time. We've always had, I'm glad to say, very good reports in terms of how well money is administered. But you'll appreciate, giving out that amount of public funding, we have to carry it out very carefully. We have people going in the ground, carrying out financial verification visits in groups we fund. So I'm sure no one's suggesting that that is not essential. So in terms of the figure, I wouldn't like to give you a figure today. Happy to go back to base, speak to colleagues and come back to the committee with a figure in due course. But certainly what I can say assuredly now is the vast majority of our staff time is not involved in funding. Funding is important. It's the lifeblood for the many organisations we fund. And indeed, if some of them were sitting here today, they would say to you, without our core funding, they go out of business, because very few funders nowadays will fund core, will fund infrastructure. They'll fund short-term project funding. That's relatively easier to get. But we do know, and sadly, a couple of the organisations we fund have gone out of business in recent years because of problems of funding. A couple more I know are on the brink. And certainly if the Council is forced to impose a further cut in funding, then that could be prejudicial to their future survival. I do know on the only occasion in my memory, about 12 years ago, when we had a cut, the Youth Council itself took a bigger percentage cut in its own running costs, as it were, to try to cushion the RVOs themselves. With the £1 million cut, no matter how hard we hit ourselves and yet maintain our statutory functions, it would be very hard to cushion much of that impact on those organisations. And I really feel for them, having also personally worked not just in the Education Eye boards, but as a voluntary worker in a local club, and also worked in a regional voluntary organisation myself. So we do empathise very strongly with our colleagues.
Thanks. Chair, I think it's right. Just I do think this does warrant further investigation. I was alarmed this morning that when the Minister mentioned £800,000 in what could technically be looked at as another layer of bureaucracy that we do not need. So I think if we do seek a bit of clarity around this, it would be.
It's also made me think that there's the duplication in the authority as well, and that's what we should investigate.
The authority,
as well.
and it may not be the Youth Council, maybe the authority has the duplication, whatever it is, but it's worth it.
So one other point my colleague would like to make, I think would be relevant to your point.
I suppose just, the Minister, the Irish medium work and youth work that he would have been familiar with recently. Although I look after the funding of that going out to support regional development of that and then the coordination of that across the voluntary organisations. A huge amount of my time has also been spent, that's an emerging area of work, so supporting those who are involved in that work to be aware of education, of training opportunities, working with my board colleagues to bring everything together, try and develop that area more coherently, and in some ways protecting the voice of the voluntary sector within that, which I think we have been very good in Youth Council at protecting. We're not a huge organisation, and perhaps that will be our downfall, that a lot has been about where the voluntary sector can take it forward. We have certainly...
Not certainly, and I empathise certainly what you're saying, but I think there's a duty upon us, given the very harsh economic climate that we're finding and some of the decisions that's been taken around the budget. If we didn't examine this issue, I think there would be questions to be asked us as a committee, especially.
Thank you, Chris. So we certainly will do that and look at it. Thank you. Thanks very much. A very good presentation. And we do know how valuable you are, and you should be holding your heads high and knowing that you are incredibly important to us.
Can I just make two brief comments? Firstly, because I have two good colleagues here, without whose work a lot of the work we've described wouldn't happen, so I don't take any applause for it. I applaud my two colleagues, Norma and Joanne here. Also, thank you for the appreciation you've shown today in not just work with Youth Council, but also work with CRED, which is crucial. And as far as we understand, the Minister is yet to make a final decision on that, because the Quality Impact Assessment consultation is not yet finished on CRED, so that's a live issue. And also to thank you on behalf of all youth organisations with whom we work and fund. Thank you for your interest in this, and hopefully we will get a better settlement, but still recognising that, as Mr Hazard's point, that we all live within restricted resources, and we certainly do respect that. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Norma, Joanne, David, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Action.
Well, action is just right to the department, as you've indicated, on the funding question, and to write to YCNI as well, just in this funding.
Okay. Should we also write to see what use is going to be made should CRED be cut, to make sure that we learn everything we can from their expertise on CRED and the decisions and the way forward?
Okay, yes, Chair.
Yeah, okay, thank you. If we can move on then to point 8, which is the Assembly Research written briefings on coding in schools and special education needs and the Disability Bill. And can I refer members to the Clerk's cover note at page 129, and refer members to the Coding in Schools paper at page 130, and the SEN Bill paper in today's table of papers. And can I seek your agreement to note these papers?
Note it, yeah.
Thank you.
So, Chair, just to remind members, the second stage of the SEND bill is Tuesday. So there's the paper in, which is Caroline's paper, which is quite good. For information.
Okay, thank you. If I can move on to agenda item 9, which is correspondence, and refer members to pages 149 to 213, where we have 13 items provided under correspondence. The key pieces in 9.2, the NDCS Quality Standards for Resource Provisions, page 149. Do you want me to just... Yeah, you go on.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, there's, as the Chair has indicated, 13 items of correspondence. Some of them I've suggested that members may wish to note. I guess if members wish to indicate otherwise, but I think the Chair had something to say about 9.8.
I mean, only 9.8 I put in there, and that we spend our life being told how good Finland is. And when I met someone from the Finnish education thing at something else I was at, he sent me that 2 pages on it, which is quite good to see. But I think if anyone ever picks things up, it's good to know more. Anyone else like to raise anything? Hang on, I was going to get Chris first, and I'll come to you.
Sorry, and I said no.
Okay, Robin.
I have a hard copy of that finished document, Chair.
Okay, okay.
Yes.
I think it's number 13. It's the one from Generator Northern Ireland about the conference we're having on the 26th of March in Derry, Londonderry. Future music education.
It's 14, 9.14. 14, yep.
I'm not reading the paper here. I don't know if it's the same. This is an area that we tend to not to give any attention to, but it's actually quite important for various reasons. I just noticed
by the organ.
Oh, well, I'll declare an interest if you like. But I noticed from last year's conference notes that there wasn't a single politician there. I do think it would be worthwhile for the committee to be represented.
Are you going to represent us?
Well done.
Well,
Congratulations.
well, we don't need to make a decision. You know, I would possibly go anyway, but I think a formal committee representation might be not a bad thing.
I think that's a good point. We all should note it.
In terms of clashing, just at that point, and politicians going to things, I notice number 4 there, the Joint Consultative Forum is at the same time as our meeting.
Yeah. This is irregular, and we've told the Joint Consultative Forum this many times. They always have it on a Wednesday, but I suspect it's going to come to an end now, because it's the Joint Consultative Forum involves the boards. They're going to be dissolved, so I think it's their last hurrah. But the clerk has mentioned this to the organisers of that committee a number of times.
Who organises the committee?
Oh, I think it is the boards. It's the boards may take turns at it, but we do get the papers, and there is some interesting stuff in it. Unusual.
Yeah, there's some interesting things for that particular day.
Absolutely.
But
would you like a formal letter written?
Yeah, well, if it's going to
sure
cease to
happy to
exist,
yeah.
probably not much.
Just I agree with you in terms of the Finnish article. I think the one line that jumps out at me there, that Finland invests substantially in special education needs, and it removes the stigma associated with it. So I think that's key measures there. I think also there was a particular one about transport issues to the chair, transport issues with the new school in Bergen, I think, requesting a meeting with some members of the committee. I think we should try to facilitate that if at all possible.
In the normal way of after trying to get them to come here immediately after a committee, and we'll do it that
come
way.
Here, yeah.
Okay, 9:11.
It's 9:12. Yes.
9:12 is it? Okay.
I don't know if you want to bring to members' attention number 11.
Okay, number 11 is the Home to Transport review, page 187, with the department response to committee queries regarding the report into Home to School Transport review. The department advises that Home to School Transport support in terms of qualifying distances and rules governing support to attend suitable schools are subject to DE circulars and can be changed without legislation. I'm really just bringing that to, and that's partly why I asked the question. We did with the Minister. He can change it, but he said he won't until after the review, if I...
He's done consultations, so he's doing a consultation.
Okay, after the consultation. Okay. Is that the end of correspondence?
It is.
So if we can deal with all the correspondence as per the cover sheet. Okay, and then if we can move to the draft forward work programme and refer members to the copy of the draft forward work programme, pages 215 to 219. And remind members that they previously agreed to meet with representatives from Glenveigh School to discuss issues regarding SEN. This meeting has now been scheduled to take place prior to the committee's health event in room 55 at 5 o'clock on the 18th of March. And members, please would you indicate to staff whether you wish to attend that meeting. Also remind members that next week the committee will be meeting in Shimna, Integrated College, Newcastle, where members will hear evidence from Sir Bob Salisbury on the committee's inquiry into shared and integrated education, and obviously would encourage members to attend this visit, and lunch will be provided afterwards. And lastly, under that heading, I seek members' agreement to endorse the forward work programme. Okay?
Yep.
Done. Yep. Thank you. Any other business? Okay, Trevor was first, then I'll come to you.
I have an inquiry on the back of the discussion about bodies that are funded by the Education Department. The post-primary counselling service, which is provided by Family Works, could we inquire of the department what the situation going forward is for that service?
Okay.
Yeah.
It's actually very similar because you know, the back of what Trevor said, the Princess Trust was another. I noted with interest what the Minister actually said. There's a table somewhere within.
Yeah.
He referred to within the budget that actually outlines the breakdown for all of these
more detail
outside body.
I haven't that to us within 2 days.
Yeah.
Promised.
Are we getting that, or Peter, will you ensure that we get that, because he did promise it there?
To clarify for members, in tabled items there is a table which gives you something about NDPBs. So like CNG, etc. would be in that, but what the members asking about are the third-party organisations.
Yeah.
Previously agreed, right to the Minister asking for that breakdown. So it's organisations like Sentinus and the rest of the Book Trust. I want to know about.
Okay. And date and time of next meeting. Committee is scheduled to meet Wednesday, 11th of March, 2015, 10 o'clock at Shimna Integrated College, Newcastle. So can I put the question that we adjourn? Thank you. Good. Thank you very much.
Very good. Well done.